Chapter 226. Yun Yang said nonchalantly, "It's reasonable for your highness to have heard of this person. This person isn't an ordinary scholar. He's the leader of the Empire of Yutong's literati, a third-generation assistant minister. He's very famous." First Court King Qingguang looked at Yun Yang suspiciously, vaguely feeling that this fellow was digging a hole but he did not know where it was. He Hanqing was the leader of the Empire of Yutong's literati, an assistant minister for 3 generations. He might be a remarkable figure in the imperial court, but to First Court King Qingguang, he was just an old scholar. It was not a big deal at all. Wait till I go back and check the concourse of the underworld special class name list. First Court King Qingguang was still cautious as he replied, "As long as there are no problems after the investigation, I'll make the decision for you." Yun Yang rolled his eyes and said, "Big brother, you still need to go back and check on such a small matter. I thought it could be settled now. You can go out later and this job will be done." "Your Highness, First Court King Qingguang, your boldness. If this matter were to spread, it would really be embarrassing." First Court King Qingguang's face flushed as he said, "This is the concourse of the underworld's practice. No matter what mission we encounter, we have to investigate it first. This is the duty of an assassin. What's there to be ashamed of?" Yun Yang sighed and said, "As a legendary-level assassin, there are still so many concerns when it comes to accepting a small deal. Your Highness, although I know that an assassin's organization must be strictly disciplined and there are some forbidden characters or missions that can't be accepted, I'm afraid that I can't accept them." First Court King Qingguang nodded. "It's rare that young Master Yun has some knowledge. The rules in our line of work are sometimes helpless. There are indeed some things that can't be done, some missions that can't be accepted, and some people that can't be killed. Once we touch these people, it's very easy to bring great trouble to our sect, and even a disaster of annihilation." Yun Yang said, "However, the concourse of the underworld must value the name list of these dangerous people. The higher-ups must be very familiar with it, right?" First Court King Qingguang replied, "Of course. In other words, the leaders of the concourse of the underworld, such as the 10 lords of the temple, would have memorized these names at all times. Am I right?" Yun Yang said, "I can understand it as these people's names are all in your hearts, and you can't accept them when others mention them. Am I right?" First Court King Qingguang thought about it and said, "Yes. Looking at the world today, there are only a handful of people we can't kill. At least to us, the concourse of the underworld, it's almost negligible." After saying that, a sense of arrogance overflowed from his words. Yun Yang pursed his lips and said, "Then I find it strange. Your Highness, the First Court King Qingguang, the absolute higher-up of the concourse of the underworld, how could you not know if the name He Hanqing was on the name list? Do I really need to go back and retrieve it? Or was my understanding wrong?" First Court King Qingguang scratched his head. This name is probably not there anymore, right? I really don't remember that name. It just feels a little familiar." "Yeah? Since he's not on the list, he's someone to be killed. Is there a need to go back and confirm it?" Yun Yang asked patiently. First Court King Qingguang shook his head blankly before nodding. "Since you know that his name isn't on the list, Your Highness King Qingguang said that you want to go back and check." Yun Yang's expression turned cold as he said faintly, "Your Highness King Qingguang, are you rejecting me tactfully? Or do you not want to help me at all? Or perhaps you don't want to give me a 20% discount and break the concourse of the underworld's other rules?" First Court King Qingguang scratched his head again and said, "Young Master Yun, you're wrong. You and I are like old friends at first sight. I find you very pleasing to the eye." Yun Yang waved his hand and said with a cold expression, Don't make it sound so nice. Since Your Highness King Qingguang can't make the decision, it's best that you return as soon as possible. I'll find someone else. I hope that Your Highness King Qingguang will not expose this matter in consideration of the assassin's rules. I, Yun Yang, am already eternally grateful." First Court King Qingguang's mouth was agape. "Send the guest off." Yun Yang stood up coldly and raised his teacup. "I still have matters to attend to. I can't keep you company. Your Highness, please help yourself." He was about to leave once he finished speaking. It was as if he did not want to stay for another minute. First Court King Qingguang felt his mind go blank for a moment. Was this fellow not being too practical? He was still talking about business with a smile just a moment ago, But when he heard that he could not do it in the next, "That's not right. I didn't even say that I can't do it. I only said to check and confirm." Why did they suddenly turn hostile and start to chase him away? Does your face belong to a curtain? Pull it down just like that? Young Master Yun. First Court King Qingguang was exasperated as well. With his status, when had he ever suffered such humiliation? Immediately, his heroic spirit soared to the sky as he roared, "We can still discuss this business." Yun Yang's footsteps did not stop. "Why bother? Since I know that your highness can't make the decision, it's better for me to change to another party and find someone who can make the decision to discuss this matter. I don't want to waste everyone's time. I'm a popinjay, young master. Of course I don't mind, but your highness is a busy man. You still have to check and confirm the information. I dare not delay you. I can't make the decision? Is there anything in the concourse of the underworld that I can't make the decision?" First Court King Qingguang felt a surge of anger as he said loudly, "Deal. The concourse of the underworld accepts this deal." Yun Yang, who had already taken a dozen steps away, stopped immediately and turned back with a smile, friendly, gentle, and courteous. "Oh, if so, I wish us a pleasant cooperation. Yun Yang knew that your highness is a straightforward person. You don't know this, but you and I feel like old friends at first sight. I've taken a liking to you since the first time I saw you. This is probably the saying of, turning white as new, becoming like old friends in an instant." First Court King Qingguang's mouth was agape as he stared at Yun Yang's face, unable to wrap his head around the situation. What kind of situation was this? A moment ago, you were still fuming with rage and looking like you were about to leave. How could you say that we're having a pleasant cooperation now? He was indeed Tiantang City's young Master Yun, a man of the metropolis indeed. Just this cultivation base of changing one's countenance. If changing one's countenance and emotions could be a mystical skill, then this young Master Yun would already be unparalleled in the martial world, laughing at all heroes. "Let's talk about the price then." Yun Yang laughed heartily and said, "It's one thing to take a liking to each other, but don't brothers have to settle accounts clearly? Your highness, feel free to name your price. No matter how much you say, I won't bargain with you just because you're straightforward." First Court King Qingguang scratched his head and said, "Under normal circumstances." Does the discount your highness mentioned just now still count?" Yun Yang asked with a grin. "Discount?" First Court King Qingguang's brain short-circuited again. "You've just said that you won't bargain. And now you're asking for a discount? What kind of person is this?" He sighed inwardly and said, "He Hanqing is an old scholar, but he's still the tutor of 3 emperors, the leader of a generation of literati. Just this alone is enough for the concourse of the underworld to bear a huge risk. In addition, we'll have to face the Empire of Yutong's investigation. Therefore, the price can't be too low." King Qingguang calculated in his heart and said, "A few years ago, we accepted a mission to assassinate the Empire of Zio's minister. We received 500,000 silver taels back then." Yun Yang hummed in acknowledgement, not saying a word with a stoic expression. First Court King Qingguang gritted his teeth and said, "But it's been so long, so the price has increased. Let's take the price of assassinating a minister as an example, 1 million silver taels." Yun Yang snapped his fingers. "Deal. 800,000 it is then. I'll give you the banknotes right now. Straightforward people, straightforward matters, straightforward energy. If you're happy, I'm happy too." First Court King Qingguang's eyes widened. 800,000? He suddenly felt his head spinning. Did I say 1 million or 800,000 just now? Yun Yang smiled warmly and said, "Thank you, Your Highness, for the 20% discount. I've saved 200,000 silver taels. It would be impolite to refuse, but I'm ashamed to accept it. How about this? I'll treat you tonight. What would Your Highness like to eat?" King Qingguang's eyes widened, wanting very much to say, "The 1 million I mentioned just now is already the price after the 20% discount." However, looking at Yun Yang's sincere smile, how could he say such a thing? He accepted the silver taels muddle-headedly and took out the concourse of the underworld's contract. Both parties signed it and a puff of blood turned into a puff of black smoke that rose into the sky along with the oath. The contract came into effect immediately. Looking at the black smoke rising into the sky, First Court King Qingguang's lips twitched uncontrollably. This was not right. It was only a contract to kill an old scholar. Why would there be black smoke rising from the underworld? This was a high-grade oath contract that had been approved by Heaven's Will after going through an arcane art. Logically speaking, the most it could do was emit a puff of white smoke. Even when he accepted the mission to kill someone like by Xueqi, there was only a puff of green smoke. Why was there black smoke now? Could it be that Han Qing had another identity other than being the leader of the School of Literature and the assistant of 3 emperors? However, the contract had come into effect. No one could go back on their word or they would be punished by heaven. First Court King Qingguang mumbled in his heart, praying inwardly. Perhaps this person is too important to the Empire of Yutong. I hope so. Come, let's go. I'll treat you tonight. Yun Yang invited enthusiastically. I know your highness's identity. It's not appropriate for you to eat in public. Lao Mei, Lao Mei. After calling out twice, Lao Mei walked over quickly. Young master, what orders do you have? Go to the best hotel, order the best dishes, get the best wine. I'm going to entertain His Highness King Qingguang tonight. Let's have a good drink, Yun Yang said generously. There's no need for that. First Court King Qingguang was already on his guard, anxious to go back and check what kind of mission he had accepted. How could he have the mood to stay and drink now? For the quickest and most up-to-date novel reading, please visit Chapter 227. August is finally over. A fiery August, an August on the shelves, an August of passion. My passion is like a fire, burning for the entire August. Thank you everyone for your support in August. This August, I will remember it. Although the monthly votes are still the same as the previous few books, with their chrysanthemums exploding on the last day, I am also very gratified. After all, I am already used to it. In fact, the truth should be, as a new book that has just been on the shelves for a month, to be able to achieve such results is already very impressive. It is all thanks to everyone's hard work and support. Thank you all. Now, September is here. Another month has begun. Then, I will tell everyone a piece of good news. Starting from the second half of last month, I have already cancelled all my foreign affairs activities. For the next 2 months, I have cancelled all my activities and am preparing to write with all my might. Am I good? Am I handsome? Today is the 1st of September. Let me play a game with everyone today. Yes, red and purple. As of midnight on the 2nd, the number of monthly votes we have will determine the number of updates. At midnight on the 2nd, if the monthly votes are in first place, the number of updates will be 200 on the 2nd. Ahem, don't ask me if I can do it. The question is whether everyone can do it. Hehe. Top 3. 10 minutes. Top 6. 6 minutes. Top 10. 4 minutes. Come on, let's meet on the 2nd. Come on, I am ready. Come on, let me show off. Come on. Guaranteed monthly votes, come on, escape. Overtime. Writing. Chapter 228. I still have matters to attend to. Thank you, young master, for your kindness. Let us meet again next time. As King Qingguang spoke, he made up his mind that Yun Yang would definitely ask him to stay if he said so. But no matter how Yun Yang asked him to stay later, he could not stay. This was a serious matter. Ah, I see. Since your highness is so busy, I shall not keep your highness. It would be bad if I were to delay your highness's important matters. Yun Yang was all smiles as he cupped his fists. Have a safe trip, your highness. Do come often when you're free. When First Court King Qingguang walked out of the residence of Yun, he felt like his intestines were in a knot. Why was everything this guy said so illogical? Logically, if the host had invited the guest to stay but the guest had declined, should the host not be even more passionate in asking the guest to stay? Even if he knew that he could not make the guest stay, should he not be more courteous? How could this young master Yun? He was too honest. It's just that, why do I feel so uncomfortable when he's so honest? Forget it, I'd better go back and investigate He Hanqing's background. That's a serious matter. First Court King Qingguang told himself. Today's incident had a bad feeling about it. He could faintly feel that he had been tricked. First Court King Qingguang turned into a ghastly fog and left as fast as lightning. After a long time. At an unusually secretive location. First Court King Qingguang cried out, his face pale and drained of all color. He was trembling all over, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets as he wailed, "Despicable bastard, your father has been tricked by you." Initially, after checking the forbidden list and confirming that He Hanqing's name was not on it, First Court King Qingguang was finally relieved. However, when he flipped through the list of dangerous people, he discovered something unexpected. The concourse of the underworld's forbidden list meant that these people should not be killed if they could. Killing them would bring great trouble to oneself, but it was not that they could not be targeted at all. As long as the price was high enough, they could still be killed. However, the other list of dangerous people was completely different. The so-called list of dangerous people. The people on this list were the real danger. This danger was manifested in the fact that the target's strength was ridiculously high. You might not be able to kill him, and the person who attacked him might even die at his hands. Secondly, even if the target was killed, there would still be a follow-up to this incident. The target still had a powerful background behind him, and it was very likely that it would bring great danger to the concourse of the underworld, or even a catastrophe. This kind of person must never be touched. However, when King Qingguang looked at the name list, he saw a problem. When he first read it, he didn't see the name He Hanqing either. But just as King Qingguang was about to close the name list, he saw a place that seemed particularly familiar. He couldn't help but take a closer look. The Four Seasons Towers Must Not Kill list. Mr. Nian, Saber, Sword, Snow, Frost, and Ice. The Four Supreme Lords. The first 6 people did not have specific names, only code names. However, the 4 great supremacies had names. The first in line was astonishingly Supreme Lord Spring Frost He Hanqing. Seeing this, First Court King Qingguang shuddered, his eyes bulging. With a wail, he sprung up, his hair standing on end as the pores all over his body opened up. He was petrified. Oh my God! This must be a dream. The next moment, First Court King Qingguang looked through the list again with widened eyes. Finally he sighed, his face ashen. It's really him. An important figure of the Four Seasons Tower. Supreme Lord Spring Frost. He Hanqing. Such a person was not only extremely dangerous, he was absolutely not to be touched. According to the concourse of the underworld's principles, even if the other party were to offer billions of taels of gold, they would not touch a person. Who would have thought that he would actually sign an absolute death contract with the price of 1,000,000 taels today? Moreover, I've even given him a 20% discount on this 1,000,000 taels. First Court King Qingguang felt like he was going to die for a moment. Looking at the signed contract, thinking about the acknowledgement of heaven's will and the punishment of violating the contract. First Court King Qingguang wanted to cry but had no tears. It's over. It's over. I've been tricked badly this time. How could this happen? First Court King Qingguang paced back and forth in the secret chamber, walking 70 to 80 rounds in just a short while. He pulled at his hair so hard that he was almost bald. I must discuss this with the other brothers. First Court King Qingguang was as anxious as a stray dog, turning into a wraith fog and dashing out of the secret chamber. It was as if he was being chased by a 1,000,000-strong army as he ran back with all his might. He wanted to return to the concourse of the underworld's headquarters. He wanted to discuss it with the other brothers. This matter is too serious. Brothers, I've pierced a hole in the sky. First Court King Qingguang looked miserable as he sprinted. No wonder I felt a sense of familiarity. So that's how it is. There are actually 4 more words in front of the name He Hanqing. Those 4 words are the ones that really resound like thunder to the ears. As a result, He Hanqing's name was not that eye-catching at the back. Of course, I have no impression of the name He Hanqing, but why didn't you tell me that you wanted to kill Supreme Lord Spring Frost? I'm finished. If the other brothers knew about this, how would they scold me? Are you an idiot? Is your brain made of glue? Even if it's not mush, it must be flooded. Have you been living for so many years in vain? Don't you think so? Why aren't you going to die? Everything else aside, these words were definitely there. First Court King Qingguang sighed as he ran. F***CK. I knew that pretty boys aren't good people. Your father has really been tricked today. Your father must be blind. Why did I find him pleasing to the eye? Why do I even care about him? Pretty boys don't have good intentions. What a wise saying. King Qingguang left. Yunyang finally heaved a sigh of relief. Having signed the contract witnessed by heaven, Even if King Qingguang found out about it later, he could not go back on his word. Although this matter was despicable and went against his conscience, he could not care so much for now given the current situation. Bai Yixue also heaved a sigh of relief. Coming out of the room, he looked at Yun Yang like he had seen a ghost. His expression was one of disbelief, incredulity, and doubt. Bai Yixue's gaze was filled with shock. "Young Master Yun, you must know He Hanqing's true identity," Bai Yixue said. "How so?" Yun Yang asked. Bai Yixue said, "If you didn't know how terrifying he is, you wouldn't have plotted against First Court King Qingguang. You know very well what kind of identity King Qingguang has. The consequences of tricking him like this are unimaginable. However, you did it despite knowing it. This can only mean that He Hanqing's identity is actually more terrifying than First Court King Qingguang's." Yun Yang replied faintly, "Not necessarily." "Who is He Hanqing?" Bai Yixue asked in a low voice. "Are you sure you want to know?" Yun Yang looked at Bai Yixue with interest. Bai Yixue said angrily, "I've already offended him. Can't I even know his true identity?" Yun Yang looked at Bai Yixue with a different expression. Bai Yixue instinctively felt that something was amiss. "If it's inconvenient." He wanted to say, "Don't say it if it's inconvenient." Before he could finish his sentence, Yun Yang had already said leisurely, "He Hanqing is the Four Seasons Tower Supreme Lord Spring Frost." Supreme Lord Spring Frost. The four words were like a thunderclap that rang in Bai Yixue's head. He actually felt a little dizzy at that moment. When he came back to his senses, Bai Yixue suddenly felt extremely speechless. He wanted to cry, but he had no tears to shed. "I've actually offended the most terrifying sect in the martial arts world, the Four Seasons Tower. I even wanted to assassinate their Supreme Lord Spring Frost. Am I tired of living?" Bai Yixue looked at Yun Yang with a resentful gaze. "This child has set me up so badly. It's useless even if you kill me now. It's useless even if you betray me. Because you've already offended those you should have offended." Yun Yang's smile was gentle. Bai Yixue was tongue-tied as he said in grief and indignation, You've set me up. You won't regret it in the future." Yun Yang smiled. It was this smile that made Bai Yixue want to punch him just by looking at it. After a long moment of dizziness, he finally remembered and said, "But even if you don't have a reason to set First Court King Qingguang up." "I do," Yun Yang said calmly, "and I'm confident." "Confident?" Bai Yixue was bewildered. What kind of person was First Court King Qingguang? Did he really not know He Hanqing's identity? The more Bai Yixue thought about it, the more confused he became. However, looking at Yun Yang's confident smile, he finally realized that his brain was not even worth mentioning compared to this young Master Yun before him. He decided to stop guessing and ask honestly, Young Master Yun, how did you do it?" Bai Yixue was stuttering. Yun Yang looked at Bai Yixue meaningfully and smiled faintly. "Because of you, I did it." "Because of me?" Bai Yixue could not wrap his head around it. What did this have to do with him? Bai Yixue felt that his brain capacity was severely lacking. He did not know if it was an illusion, but ever since he was forced to seek refuge in the residence of Yun after being injured, his brain had been lacking. He had made up his mind to seek refuge here under the pretext of denouncing Yun Yang, but Yun Yang's aura had turned the tables on him in a matter of seconds and his face had been peeled clean, yet he still could not leave in anger. Then, his treasured collection had vanished into thin air. He had only asked a few questions and he had been reprimanded, almost breaking down from frustration. What truly made Bai Yixue break down and feel fear, even terror, was the fact that First Court King Qingguang had come today and Yun Yang had led the mighty King Qingguang into a pit with just a few words without him even realizing it. He had even casually brought up Heaven's will as a witness. It was a clear sign that King Qingguang would not pay with his life. Thinking back to the past, was he not King Qingguang's precedent? Yun Yang was merely repeating the pattern, changing the medicine but not the soup. Chapter 229. Thinking of this, Bai Yixue was speechless. He had just been laughing at First Court King Qingguang for being stupid, but what difference was there between him and King Qingguang? He might not even be as good as the other. At least, King Qingguang was the one who had been tricked, but he himself was the one who had come looking for trouble. The reason First Court King Qingguang came here and stayed for a period of time is to kill you. Yunyang chuckled softly. The reason you came to Tiantang City was to avoid King Qingguang's death hunt. Am I right about this? Bai Yixue scratched his head. Yes, but what do the both of us have to do with this? Yunyang snorted and said, it's a very simple and logical deduction. You were chased by him previously, running around in panic. How did you suddenly have the time to wander around? Not only did you have the time to gamble, you could even accept my request to do something for me. All these have already shown that King Qingguang hasn't been in Tiantang City during this period of time. He must have left due to some unexpected incident. That's why you can be so carefree. You're temporarily safe now that your biggest rival has left. Otherwise, how would you have the mood to be so carefree? How dare you wander around without a care in the world? Conversely, it also means that King Qingguang has no interest in anyone else in Tiantang City, especially when he doesn't know about you assassinating He Hanqing. Yunyang said. What does this have to do with me assassinating He Hanqing? The corners of Bai Yixue's lips twitched. Could he not mention this? Of course it does, it's very much related. If he knew that you failed to assassinate He Hanqing and even suffered a loss, he probably wouldn't have accepted this deal. He would at least hesitate and confirm the target's identity and background. Even if he did accept it in the end, the price he'd ask for would be a terrifying sum. There's a high chance that I wouldn't be able to afford it. There are many people in Tiantang City who know about you. So as long as King Qingguang is back, he'll know as long as he's given some time. Yunyang said. So, I can't give him this time. Therefore, I went to look for him the moment he returned to Tiantang City. I didn't give him time to understand what happened in Tiantang City during this period of time. He doesn't know what his next transaction will be. Besides, I'm also betting on He Hanqing's identity. He Hanqing's identity as Supreme Lord Springfrost is very likely something the concourse of the underworld can't accept. However, with so many names on the list, I'm betting that King Qingguang will only remember Supreme Lord Springfrost, but he might not remember the name He Hanqing. If he remembers it, then there's no hope at all. But if he doesn't remember, then it will be my chance. Just like what you saw and heard, I seized my opportunity just like that. Before this, I had also thought that it might not work. But I just thought, no matter if it works or not, why not give it a try? What if his luck was good? So I gave it a try. Yunyang smiled and said, so this matter is settled. I really have to thank you for being his #1 target and being heavily injured by him. Most of his attention was on you, otherwise, it would have been impossible for him to succeed. I understand. When First Court King Qingguang truly understands the severity of this matter, there's no turning back. The contract has been signed. He can't bear the backlash of going against heaven's will. Even if he's unwilling, even if he's furious, he has to fulfill his promise. Bai Yixue was full of admiration. I, Bai Yixue, have never admired anyone in my life, and I've never thought that there's anything that can't be solved with a sword. It's only now that I know that the most lethal weapon isn't the sword, but calculation. Bai Yixue sighed. Today's incident has let me know that even without an ounce of martial skill, one can still calculate the destruction of one's enemy, who has a high cultivation base. Yunyang did not look pleased as he said faintly, of course, such calculation can achieve one's goal. In addition, it can also reap greater benefits in a short period of time. But it's all despicable and despicable. If I had a choice, I wouldn't have done it. Everything is because of my lack of ability. Yunyang said, the concourse of the underworld will definitely suffer a great loss if they want to complete their mission this time. I've used First Court King Qingguang's affection towards me in this matter. I'm despicable, I admit it. But if I had to do it all over again, I'd still do it. Bai Yixue pursed his lips and said, I wonder if young Master Yun feels apologetic towards me? You've tricked me the same way. Yunyang beamed and said, that's why I'm prepared to compensate you. Bai Yixue looked at Yunyang and asked in a low voice, how will you compensate me? Yunyang thought about it while stroking his chin and said, I'll compensate you handsomely. I can guarantee that you won't have to worry about food or clothing for the rest of your life from now on. I'll take care of your basic necessities, food, lodging, and everything you have. As the price for all these benefits, you'll only have to help me with a few things occasionally in the future. Bai Yixue said in disdain. Do you really think I'm stupid? In your dreams. He said angrily. I almost lost my life for just one thing and you're asking for a few things. You're obviously taking me in as your subordinate. Dream on. Yunyang said slowly. Bai Yixue, if you don't agree, you'll definitely regret it in the future. You'll regret it immensely. But it'll be too late then. Bai Yixue scoffed. He had already seen through Yunyang's true intentions. How could he be fooled again? He would be an idiot if he were to fall for it again. However, he had just taken a few steps when he jolted, completely stunned. He turned back stiffly to look at Yunyang. Yunyang smiled. I've still been tricked by you. Bai Yixue groaned. I've been tricked by you again. He finally understood. Ever since Yunyang had mentioned Supreme Lord Spring Frost to him, there was no way out for him. He could still console himself if he did not know who the enemy was, but now that he knew, he was even more aware of how terrifying the Four Seasons Tower was. Just like what Yunyang had said earlier, he couldn't go back even if he was afraid. He couldn't go back even if he betrayed him. Even if he did not become Yunyang's subordinate, the Four Seasons Tower would not let him go no matter where he was. While the Four Seasons Tower was going against him, it meant that he was also going against the Four Seasons Tower. He was indirectly working for Yunyang. This little bastard. Bai Yixue was utterly speechless. Can you not plot against me to such an extent? In this life. Can you let me get away from this? Xue Wuyin smiled at the side but did not make a sound. Xue Wuyin was in awe of Yunyang's success in dragging the concourse of the underworld into this mess. It was amazing. To Xue Wuyin, he did not have Yunyang's psychological burden of being despicable. He was absolutely delighted to see it happen. He said, Young Master's move is brilliant. With the concourse of the underworld's involvement, our subsequent plans will be much smoother. If we can pull in other similar super gangs in the future, it won't be an extravagant hope to set up a plan to assassinate He Hanqing. Bai Yixue rolled his eyes, finally unable to listen to it anymore and turned to leave. These two fellows really did not know what was good for them. Do you think an organization like the Concourse of the Underworld will be happy to be tricked by you? You're thinking too much. When this is done, the revenge from the Concourse of the Underworld will be unimaginably terrifying and cruel. I hope you can still laugh when the time comes. Just based on this alone, your father will never join you even if you beat him to death. However, when he thought about it again, Yunyang was already a dead pig that did not fear boiling water. He had already offended the Four Seasons Tower. Why would he care about the concourse of the underworld? He would die either way. Bai Yixue heaved a long sigh as he thought about it. Who have I offended? I've been dragged into the world's most terrifying whirlpool out of nowhere. What Bai Yixue could think of, Yunyang could not. Watching Bai Yixue leave, Yunyang was no longer at ease, frowning with worry written all over his face. Xue Wuyin said, Young Master is worried about the concourse of the underworld's subsequent revenge, am I right? Yunyang smiled faintly. Even if the concourse of the underworld's overall capability is weaker than the Four Seasons Towers, it won't be too far off. Such a colossus has been tricked by us. Even if they have no choice but to consider the binding of the contract, the troubles in the future will not be little. Strictly speaking, our scheme this time is mostly not worth it. We might even be killing ourselves. Xue Wuyin said, I do have an idea about this, but the follow-up will have to depend on the manpower that the concourse of the underworld sends out this time and the final outcome of this matter. It's still too early to talk about it now. Changes can never come as quickly as a plan. Yunyang sighed. He was not being pretentious. He really did not feel happy about the success of his scheme. He was definitely not as relaxed as he appeared on the surface. The concourse of the underworld. The Four Seasons Tower. The two giants of the martial world. The concourse of the underworld operated in the dark while the Four Seasons Tower was completely hidden. One was an assassin organization while the other was a mysterious organization. As long as First Court King Qingguang accepted this mission, He Hanqing would basically die. With the concourse of the underworld's capability, it was not difficult to kill Supreme Lord Spring Frost. However, as long as He Hanqing was dead, even if he could incite a war between the two gangs, Yunyang's own troubles would come one after another. After all, he was the mastermind behind this battle, the common enemy of both parties. More importantly, He had used Yun Yang's original appearance for this operation, and First Court King Qingguang had seen his cloud manifestation skill. If he were to connect the dots, he might come to the conclusion that Yun Yang was Supreme Cloud. It was not that Yun Yang had not thought of disguising himself to facilitate this, but how could First Court King Qingguang be so easily fooled? Other than Yun Yang himself, if it were someone else, he would not even bother about it. The plan now must be prepared for a rainy day and be prepared as soon as possible. Yun Yang's gaze flickered. Chapter 230. Mi Kongquan was dead. When the palace servants found Mi Kongquan's corpse, it was already the afternoon of the second day after the incident. Looking at Mi Kongquan's mangled corpse, the Minister of Imperial Household Jiang Zhong was enraged and ordered a thorough investigation. This news shook the entire imperial palace. Mi Kongquan was not an ordinary eunuch. Setting aside his identity as the Minister of Imperial Household, he had an 8th peak pinnacle cultivation base. His battle with the 4 noble young masters and his ability to survive Ling Xiaozui's slash had already struck fear into the royal family. How could such an expert not die without a trace? It was chilling and everyone felt insecure. Everyone shared the same thought. Be it for public or private reasons, a thorough investigation was carried out. Yun Yang came to the House of Board of Justice's Minister Wu Lai for the second time. Congratulations, Sir Wu. Yun Yang checked carefully and said, your son's body can be considered to have recovered completely now. He can enjoy the life of an ordinary person. Wu Lai was overjoyed, thanking him profusely. However, your son has been weak for many years and his foundation has been damaged. In addition, his innate talent isn't very good. Yun Yang deliberated and said, from now on, he can only further his studies in terms of literary talent and knowledge. He mustn't cultivate mystical qi and increase the damage to his body. Wu Lai was extremely satisfied as he said, I understand. As long as my son can live as long as a normal person, this is already very good. This old man never dreamed that this day would come. How could I dare to have any other extravagant requests? He smiled and said, besides, the saying goes that the poor study while the rich practice martial arts. To practice martial arts, one not only needs talent but also a large amount of wealth. As for our family, it's close to being penniless. How can we support the growth of a mystical qi cultivator? My son can live a peaceful life as a scholar with a clear conscience. It's already something that I couldn't even dream of. This old man is already satisfied. Yun Yang said, Sir Wu has a heart of gold and a heart of gold. I'm sincerely convinced. Wu Lai said gratefully, I should be the one thanking Sir Supreme Wind. Sir Supreme Wind's kindness to the Wu family is immeasurable. This old man really has no way to repay it. At this moment, Wu Lai was truly moved to tears. However, with his personality, he really couldn't bring himself to say something like, if there's anything I can do for you in the future, I'll go through fire and water and die 10,000 times over. Because he would not use his power to make any promises. This was his foundation, his way of doing things, his principles of being a person, not going against his original intentions. Yun Yang chortled and said, Yutong's criminal law is good as long as my lord is well. You're welcome. Wu Lai was so grateful that he was speechless. He could only pull Yun Yang's hand and shake it continuously. However, there is one thing that I need Sir Wu to provide me with some information, Yun Yang said. What is it? Wu Lai said, as long as this Wu can do it and it doesn't violate the laws of the country, this Wu will definitely not object. Yun Yang replied, how much does Sir Wu know about Shen Yushi? When Wu Lai heard this, he immediately frowned. Shen Yushi was the assistant minister of the Board of Justice, second only to Wu Lai. However, this person had always kept a low profile, almost like a shadow. Although he did his best to do things, he never showed his face. There were very few records about this person. In fact, the 9 Heavens Dictum's records about Shen Yushi did not show any abnormalities. If Mi Kongquan had not pointed it out, it would have been difficult to link this person to the Four Seasons Tower spy. Yun Yang was rather doubtful about this. He could not just kill whoever Mi Kongquan said was, could he? What if he killed the wrong person? Wu Lai thought about it and said, Shen Yushi, may I ask why Lord Supreme Wind is asking about this person? Is there anything suspicious about this person? Yun Yang said, to be honest with Sir Wu, I suspect that this person is related to the ambush at Tianxian Cliff. Wu Lai looked shaken as he said, "So Lord Supreme Wind is suspecting this person as well. Sir, you've really put in a lot of effort." Also, Yun Yang asked in a low voice, "What does Sir Wu mean?" Wu Lai shook his head bitterly. "Shen Yushe is cautious and keeps a low profile. He's never done anything that stands out. No matter what he does, he's never greedy for achievements. Even when he has meritorious deeds, he gives them to others whenever he can. That's why he has a good reputation among his colleagues. Among his colleagues, even when someone used him as a stepping stone to advance, he had no complaints. Sitting in a position and not moving for years, he's still calm and gentle. He's not impatient. Occasionally, he's implicated and demoted, but he's never complained. Instead of saying that this person is a good man without a temper, it's more accurate to say that he's a sage among men." Wu Lai said. "However, this old man has always suspected that there's a huge secret hidden within this person." "How so?" Yun Yang asked. From Wu Lai's description, Yun Yang had vaguely guessed where Wu Lai's suspicions lay, but he needed further evidence. "This old man has been in the criminal law field for so many years. I know very well that in this world, as long as one is human, one will make mistakes and have weaknesses. However, this Shen Yushe, Assistant Minister Shen, has performed too perfectly. He doesn't covet an official position, doesn't covet wealth, doesn't covet fame, and doesn't covet working for the people," Wu Lai said. "He's like an omnipotent being. He's never willing to achieve results no matter what he does. Even if he does, he'll push it on to others. He doesn't covet promotion or wealth. I've thought that perhaps he's a noble person who only knows how to benefit the people and doesn't seek fame or wealth. However, I realize that this isn't the case in certain matters. Sometimes, I think that this person has been an official for so many years. If he doesn't seek fame or wealth, nor does he care for the people, then why does he do it?" Wu Lai said, "Is there really an official in this world who doesn't have any goals? And an official of the imperial court at that?" Yun Yang thought about it and said, "Sir, have you investigated this person before?" "Yes." Wu Lai chuckled bitterly and said, "Back when Shen Yushe was my assistant, this old man had always been cautious. How could I not check if there was anything wrong with my assistant? So, I began to investigate. However, after a month and a half of investigation, all the Board of Justice personnel that this old man sent out had died a violent death without exception. It was then that this old man's wife was murdered for no reason at all." Wu Lai's eyes were brimming with rage and indignation. "However, Shen Yushe was still my assistant and was respectful to me. If there was an errand, he would do his best. All the people who died had a reason for their deaths. It could be a coincidence, or they were killed by a strong person, or whatever it was, none of their deaths had anything to do with Sir Shen. However, this old man's investigation confirmed that the only similarity these people had was to investigate Shen Yushe. This old man reported this to the imperial court and asked the Board of War's Grand Commandant to assist in the investigation." The muscles on Wu Lai's face twitched. His gaze filled with deep hatred as he said, "However, this old man's son met with misfortune that very night. There's still no evidence. However, ever since then he's been under my watch for so many years. Every time I've been promoted, he's been promoted along with me. He's been my assistant all this time." A strong sense of helplessness flashed across Wu Lai's face. This old man even made a mistake on purpose and requested to be demoted, wanting to be a local official to get rid of this person. However, he actually became my advisor a few days later. All the procedures were perfectly justifiable and without any oversight. When this old man couldn't take it anymore, it just so happened that His Majesty the Emperor was in need of manpower, so I returned to work in the Board of Justice. However, he was transferred back after only 3 days, and was still my assistant. His Majesty was so gracious that he promoted me to the Board of Justice's minister, but Shen Yushe also became the Board of Justice's assistant minister. There were no traces of human manipulation in any of these incidents. With this old man's experience, this matter is simply unbelievable. If it wasn't for this old man's personal experience and a third party's account, I wouldn't have believed it." Wu Lai looked conflicted as he said, "This old man knows that the person who has always been by my side, reverently and respectfully, is the irreconcilable enemy who has harmed my wife and my son. He's also a lawless murderer who has trampled on the Empire's law and discipline, but I can't do anything about him. I can't avoid him, I can't capture him, I can't investigate him, I can't kill him. I can only watch him hover in front of me day after day. Even if someone wanted to beat him up in a drunken frenzy, they couldn't defeat him. This old man doesn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. Wu Lai sighed deeply. I wonder if Lord Supreme Wind can understand this old man's feeling? Yun Yang could not help rubbing his face with his hands. He was speechless as well. Listening to this, he felt chills running down Wu Lai's spine. This Shen Yusher could be considered a weirdo indeed. Moreover, he could be so vicious. There was really no one else like him. I harmed your wife and your son. Then, I wandered around in front of you every day. I followed you wherever you went. I loved to see you hating me to the bone, but you couldn't do anything to me. Lin Sanjiu thought. Yun Yang made up his mind instantly. This Shen Yusher, I must kill him. Perhaps there were people in this world who would lie and kill with a borrowed knife, but this person would never be Wu Lai. Since Wu Lai had said that this person was problematic, then this person must be problematic. Yun Yang trusted Lord Wu Lai unreservedly on this point. Whether Shen Yusher was a member of the Four Seasons Tower or not was no longer that important. It looks like this Shen Yusher is really problematic, and it's a huge problem. Yun Yang mused. Wu Lai said, there's definitely something wrong with this person, but I don't have any evidence to support this person. What can I do about him? I believe that if we try to punish this person, the other party will be able to produce countless pieces of evidence. Witnesses, material evidence, and time to prove that we're wrong. Besides, there are countless officials of the imperial court behind him who are willing to testify for him. Yun Yang smiled faintly and said, Lord Wu is in the criminal law, it's understandable that you're particular about evidence, but I am not someone who follows the criminal law. Chapter 231. Wu Lai looked conflicted as he murmured, how can he be convicted without evidence? How can he be arrested? How can he kill? Isn't this? As he was mumbling to himself, he was shocked to realize that Supreme Wind had disappeared from before him. He didn't know when he had disappeared without a trace. Wu Lai was stunned for a while before he murmured, how can the national law be broken? Without evidence, it's against the rules. While Sir Wu Lai was still in a dilemma, Yun Yang had already turned into a gust of cold wind, traversing dozens of miles in an instant and arriving at the house of Shen Yusher, the Assistant Minister of the Board of Justice. It was an extremely ordinary-looking residence, even more inconspicuous compared to the residence of an imperial court official. Yun Yang's manifestation of wind was shapeless as it seeped in directly. Only the soft tinkling of the bell on the eaves indicated that there was a gentle breeze. In the residence, a few guards were chatting in low voices, completely unconcerned. Yun Yang looked around and realized that only the study room was lit. There was someone inside. As for the rear courtyard, all the side rooms and the main rooms were pitch black. Surprisingly, no one lived in them. It was obvious that Sir Shen Yusher did not have any family members here. He didn't even have any maids or concubines. Lord Shen was quietly reading a book in his study. He looked calm and righteous. He was quiet and indifferent, and his sleeves fluttered in the wind. His square face and 3 strands of black beard fluttered in front of his chest. His jet-black hair was combed neatly with a few strands of silver flashing in the middle, indicating that he was no longer young. Yun Yang noticed the book he was reading. It was a collection of poems by his predecessors. He was reading it with relish, occasionally stretching his finger out and using it as a pen to write a few words in the air. Then, his expression would be filled with admiration. How carefree! Yun Yang could not help but compliment. After doing so many things, he was still able to be so calm and unrestrained. This person's mental fortitude was really amazing. Yun Yang asked himself if he could do the same if he were in his shoes. Yun Yang traversed the place quietly. He was certain that if there was really something wrong with Assistant Minister Shen, then there must be something else in this residence that should not exist. What he needed to do now was to find these things that shouldn't exist. In the study, Lord Shen Yusher, who had been reading a book, slowly stood up for some reason. With a book in one hand and another behind his back, he began to pace slowly, chanting as he slowly walked to the window and swayed back and forth. Has he already discovered me? Yun Yang's gaze flickered. With a single thought, a gust of wind suddenly blew past the window. As Yun Yang expected, Sir Shen's gaze, which seemed to be engrossed in his book, flashed with a glint before he shifted his gaze back to the book, as if nothing had happened and he had not noticed anything. Then he sighed. The wind tonight is so strong. It seems that the cold winter will come early this year. I wonder if the people are prepared to resist the cold. After saying that, he sighed again. He had the appearance of someone who bemoaned the state of the universe and pitied the fate of mankind. However, Yun Yang's pervasive wind had already discovered a vast space beneath Sir Shen's study. This righteous-looking Lord Shen actually had a secret passage in his study room, and there was another world below it. The hidden door to this secret passage was behind a painting behind the chair that Shan Yushi had been sitting on earlier. There's indeed a secret passage. Yun Yang did not hesitate. He flew out with a swoosh and went straight to the guards, knocking them out with a single slap. Pow, pow, pow. There was a total of 8 guards and 2 gatekeepers. In the blink of an eye, Yun Yang had knocked all of them out. He didn't have the slightest intention of concealing his actions. Shan Yushi's eyes glinted as he looked over through the window. This action had already shown that this person was not a simple person and possessed an extraordinary cultivation base. Yun Yang lifted his head leisurely and smiled at Sir Shen through the window, showing that everything was within his control and that he was not afraid of any reaction from Shen Yushi. In spite of this, Shen Yushi was still calm and collected. He held a book in one hand and paced around the study elegantly, reciting softly. He still looked like a frail scholar who did not even have the strength to truss a chicken. Yun Yang chuckled inwardly and walked to the window openly, knocking on it softly and calling out in a pinched voice, "Sir Shen?" Inside, Shen Yushi seemed to be shocked as he asked with a pale face, "Who is it?" "A friend," answered Yun Yang. Shen Yushi's voice was trembling. What friend?" "This official doesn't have a friend like you." Yun Yang did not have the patience to play along with him. He opened the window with a palm and came before Shen Yushi with a gust of cold air. He said mockingly, "Have you forgotten what Sir Shen has done just like that?" Shen Yushi plopped down on the chair, looking panicked, but he forced himself to remain calm and hollered, "Who are you? When have I ever done anything wrong?" Yun Yang sighed. "Shen Yushi, I'm already standing here. There's no point in you acting anymore." Under the black mask, his gaze was cold, murderous intent. "Shen Yushi, I'm only asking you, which day of the 7th, 8th, and 9th month are you?" Shen Yushi looked confused. "This official doesn't understand what you mean." Suddenly, he was enraged. "Who are you? What is the crime of entering the residence of an imperial court official in the middle of the night? Guards, there's an assassin." Yun Yang rolled his eyes. He had already cultivated the wind and cloud method. His body morphed instantly and he walked over lightly. With a swoosh, he pulled down the painting on the wall. A clean, white wall was revealed at once. Yun Yang snorted coldly and slammed his palm down. With a crack, the wall let out a sound that sounded like wood breaking as a dark hole that led downwards appeared. At this moment, Yun Yang felt a gust of wind at the back of his head as a sharp, murderous intent flashed past. "Finally, you can't hold it in anymore?" Yun Yang did not turn around but struck out with his palm. Boom! It moved brazenly. Yun Yang sprinted 3 steps forward, entering the newly revealed secret passage with the help of the momentum. A few words drifted out from the passage. "Shen Yushi, you're not pretending to be a frail scholar anymore?" Before his words echoed in the air, he had already disappeared into the secret passage. "You're courting death." Behind him, Shen Yushi's originally refined and righteous face was now ashen, his murderous intent unparalleled. His eyes were emitting a green glow. Without a second thought, he followed into the secret passage with a swoosh. The moment he entered the passage, Shen Yushi pressed his right hand to the side. Immediately, swoosh 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 sounds rang out from below. It was the activation of all the traps in the secret passage from the entrance to the secret chamber. However, the moment Yun Yang landed in the secret tunnel, he turned into a gust of wind and sped into the interior. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. He had only traveled 30 feet and had yet to reach the bottom of the secret passage when he realized that countless hidden weapons were shooting at him from all directions. They were so densely packed that there was no gap to speak of. There was also a large amount of poisonous smoke billowing out. There was a variety of colors: red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. Needles as thin as a cow's hair seemed to cover the entire space. On the other side, a strangely shaped sledgehammer ruthlessly smashed down. The reason why it was called a strangely shaped sledgehammer was because the sledgehammer structure was almost as thick as the passageway. Even the weakest person would not be able to dodge it. It was a pity that no matter how tight the attack was, it was useless against the wind. Yun Yang's wind manifestation whizzed past, descending 100 feet straight to the lowest corner amidst the attacks of the countless lethal weapons. He did not stop to think and continued his advance. Behind him, a low growl could be heard. "Thief, stop!" Yun Yang was not willing to stop. Instead, he sped up and traversed 170 feet in an instant. Amidst the dense rain of hidden weapons, he made it to the other side amidst the sound of the wind. Yun Yang had already reached another corner. With a press of his hand, a creaking sound could be heard. Suddenly, another secret door slowly opened. Like before, countless hidden weapons shot out from within. There was no way to avoid it. However, Yun Yang's body was illusory. Even when thousands of hidden weapons pierced through him, he remained unharmed. Just as the second secret door opened a slit, a ray of green light had already caught up to Yun Yang from behind. A sword emitted a blinding sword energy in the dark tunnel as it slashed down. However, Yun Yang had already entered the slit in an eerie manner, leaving the sword energy behind him. After moving another 30 feet, Yun Yang felt his vision brighten. In front of him was a secret chamber that was 100 feet in circumference. The walls were embedded with luminous pearls. It was hundreds of feet underground, but it was as bright as day, visible to the naked eye. The secret chamber's furnishings were extremely simple. There was only a table and a chair. Yun Yang curled up and went to the chair in an instant. When Shen Yushe chased after him, he could only see a masked man dressed in black, his eyes filled with mockery as he sat on the chair boldly, his arrogant demeanor obvious. Despite the intense murderous intent in Shen Yushe's eyes, there was also unconcealable shock and fear. He had attacked with all his might and the countless traps in the secret passage had been activated simultaneously. Why had he not been able to stop the other party for even a blink of an eye? What level had the other party's cultivation base reached? The hidden weapons and traps that he had set up were so densely packed that even wind and rain could not penetrate them. He could not figure out how a living person like him could slip through the gaps of the hidden weapons and come here unscathed. Chapter 232. Looking at Yun Yang's spotless black robe that did not even have a tiny hole on him, he knew that he had not been hurt by the terrifying number of hidden weapons. He looked at Yun Yang who was sitting on the chair and asked word by word, "Who are you?" Yun Yang smiled faintly and said, "I should be the one asking you this. Shen Yushe, who are you?" "Friend, a straightforward person does not resort to insinuations." Shen Yushe stood with his arms behind his back and said faintly, "Since you can find your way here, I believe you have a motive. Since you know this reputed one is from the Four Seasons Tower, then you should know what kind of existence the Four Seasons Tower is." He continued slowly, "Even Ling Xiaozue, the unrivaled expert in the world, had to retreat in the end when facing the Four Seasons Tower. You'd better think carefully if you can afford to provoke the Four Seasons Tower." Yun Yang smiled faintly. "So, you're really from the Four Seasons Tower?" Shen Yushe chuckled coldly. "Do you think it's interesting to collect evidence now?" His expression changed as he said viciously, "Tell me your motive directly. If it's not too much, I can let you go. Take it as making a friend. If, friend, just wait for the Four Seasons Tower to hunt you down." Yun Yang tilted his head and said, "Sir Shen, Assistant Minister Shen, are you so confident that the Four Seasons Tower can do anything to me?" Shen Yushe said faintly, "I've seen your cultivation base. Perhaps I'm not your match. I'm indeed strange and inexplicable and worthy of pride, but you still have no hope of keeping me here today." With one hand behind his back, he pointed at the surroundings with the other hand and said, "Since you were able to reach this place, you must know the secret of this universe secret door. In this secret room, there are a total of 10 tunnels that lead to the outside from different directions. Although I'm not your opponent, I have room to maneuver. You won't be able to keep me here. As long as I can get out from any tunnel, I can guarantee that from now on." Shen Yushe's expression was cruel as he said word by word, "You'll never have a day of peace in this life. You won't rest until you die." A powerful threat indeed. Yun Yang said, "I'm actually afraid. This is the curse of a lifetime of nightmares. What should we do?" His tone was relaxed, but was there any sign of fear? Shen Yushe flipped his wrist and an emerald longsword appeared in his hand. He said indifferently, "Since you won't listen to my kind words, don't blame me for being merciless." Yunyang sat calmly and said with a smile, "You know that you're not my opponent, but you're not thinking of running away. Instead you want to fight me. Obviously, you have other intentions." Shen Yushe's expression changed abruptly. Yunyang said, "Then let me guess, what is your motive?" A sharp glint flashed in Shen Yushe's eyes. With a sway of his body, his long sword suddenly turned into a bolt of lightning. It was obvious that he did not intend to let Yunyang continue. Yunyang executed his destiny steps and walked back and forth in the sword light that was like a dragnet. He then said faintly, "Your goal is nothing more than… in this secret chamber, there's something that you care about, or something important that can't be seen by outsiders. That's why you can't leave. Even if you want to leave, you have to use the excuse of fighting. Even if you're not my opponent, you have to find a chance to destroy those things or take them away. Only then can you leave in peace. Am I right?" The more Yunyang spoke, the uglier Shen Yushe's expression became. The sword light that he emitted grew denser, gradually accumulating to a terrifying level. "Let me guess what it is again." Yunyang's destiny's steps grew faster as he continued to wander in the dense web of swords. However, as the other sword energy grew more urgent, almost joining together, the faint sound of wind and thunder could be heard. With a swoosh, a green light flashed on Yunyang's body, and a hole was pierced at the bottom of his black robe. A ripple of cultivation method could finally be felt. Shen Yushe was actually shocked before he chuckled coldly and said, "I was wondering what kind of exceptional character it was. So it's just a sixth peak trash? Do you think you're invincible just by relying on a strange skill?" Just now, Shen Yushe had finally forced Yunyang's true ability with his 8th peak pinnacle ability when he attacked with all his might. Shen Yushe, who had confirmed Yunyang's true ability, was relieved. He no longer thought of retreating. Instead, he was determined to make Yunyang stay here. His long sword was pulled back in front of his chest, but the emerald glow of the sword grew brighter. It was obvious that it was ready to strike. Shen Yushe looked confident. "Child, take off your mask and tell me where you came from. Otherwise, this reputed one's sword will send you to the underworld." As he retracted his sword, Yunyang could clearly feel that the dense sword energy around him had disappeared. All of the sword energy had gathered at the tip of Shen Yushe's sword. A huge whirlpool had formed at the tip of his sword. Even the air in the secret chamber was sucked in by the black hole-like whirlpool. It was only a moment of stalemate, but he already felt suffocated. "You should know that with your cultivation base that has just broken through to the 6th peak, you'll never be able to withstand my returning to root." Shen Yushe was determined, facing Yunyang like a cat toying with a mouse. He had been frightened by this fellow's direct access to the secret chamber, thinking that the other party was some unparalleled expert. In the end, it was just a fellow who relied on his amazing skills to scare others. "No matter how amazing your skills are, my sword has already sealed off the entire space in the secret chamber. Even a mosquito with lightning speed would not be able to escape from this strike. What was more, a living person. This fellow in black was definitely going to die. Since that was the case, he might as well vent the anger he felt from being frightened just now." Recalling how he had almost turned to flee in fright, Shen Yushe was inexplicably furious. If it were not for the existence of the secret that this fellow had mentioned, he might have really been frightened away just now. This was a great humiliation, one that could not be tolerated. Shen Yushe was ready to strike, his eyes gleaming with the confidence of a mountain. He was indeed 100% confident that he could behead this person in front of him with a single strike. There was no way he could escape. The other party was completely locked on by his aura. At such a close distance, with such a tight lock on him, even if the other party's eyebrows were to twitch, he could behead the eyebrows that were moving. He was just that confident. Since he had such confidence, everything was within his grasp. Of course, he could toy with his opponent to avenge the humiliation of being on the losing end earlier. Even when Shen Yushe understood that it was only an illusion caused by Yunyang's strange skills, he was still enraged. He had to get rid of this knot in his heart. He was a narrow-minded person to begin with. He was already burning with rage. Yunyang maintained his composure as he sat on the chair and said faintly, "Kill me? Sir Shen, are you really so confident?" Shen Yusher smiled cruelly and said, "You can try whether I'm confident or not. Wouldn't it be clear once you try?" Shen Yusher wanted Yunyang to move again and again, to fail again and again, to feel the terror of death again and again, to toy with him to his heart's content, until he died. Yunyang sighed. "You've seen through me." Shen Yusher smirked. "Do you think you can fool me?" Yunyang stood up slowly. The tip of Shen Yusher's sword did not move, but the thousands of sword energy had condensed into a tangible form, pulsing and spitting. Yunyang walked around the table and walked forward step by step until he was 3 feet away from the tip of the sword. He stopped again and said faintly, "It looks like I can't escape today." The cruelty in Shen Yusher's gaze intensified, like a vulture in the desert. He uttered word by word, "Since you're already here, I suggest you keep your naivety to yourself." Yunyang said dejectedly, "This secret chamber looks like it'll be my burial ground." "It's good that you understand," Shen Yusher said. Yunyang sighed and said, "I can't scare you, but I've fallen into a hopeless situation instead. This is fate. However, before I die, can Sir Shen clear up my doubts?" Shen Yusher felt that the other's entire body was under his control and asked, "What doubts do you have?" Yunyang said, "Doubts won't be answered if I don't ask them. If Sir Shen can clear them up for me, I'll tell you whatever Sir Shen needs to know without reservation." Shen Yusher said coldly, "But you're still going to die. You must die now. No information can be exchanged for your life. I know that you're determined to kill me. Death is death, but it's always good if I can be a ghost with an understanding before I die," Yunyang said in a straightforward manner. "Then let me see your sincerity first. Take off your mask." Shen Yusher said coldly. Yunyang removed his mask without hesitation, revealing the thin face of a middle-aged man in his 40s. There was no fear on his face. "Actually, I don't have many doubts. The first question is, what happened to Wu Lai's family? Was it your doing?" Yunyang asked. "Wu Lai?" Shen Yusher frowned suddenly. "Did that fellow send you?" "If he did, it's rather unexpected." Yunyang did not answer. Shen Yusher denied it immediately. "No, it can't be that old fogey. Firstly, that old fogey doesn't have the financial capability. Secondly, he would never do something like this. Instead of saying that he sent you, I'm more willing to believe that you found out about what happened to him unintentionally and came to me for this reason, leading to today's encounter." Yunyang only looked at him without saying a word. Shen Yusher's statement was not entirely wrong. It was at least half correct. Without Wu Lai, Yunyang would not have attacked him so quickly. Chapter 233. Shen Yusher wore a cruel glee on his face as he said, "That old fogey has always wanted to get hold of my weakness. How could I not know that? However, he had to pay the price for provoking me. I let him know clearly that I was the one who harmed his wife. I was the one who killed his subordinates. I was the one who crippled his son." Shen Yusher said, "Then I followed him everywhere he went. Do you know how exhilarating it is to be able to see the miserable state of your enemy every day?" Yunyang frowned. "Exhilaration?" "Exhilaration, of course." Shen Yusher laughed heartily, feeling at ease. "You knew I was the one who did it, but you didn't have any evidence. You couldn't convict me, and you couldn't do anything to me in private either. Even if you used violence without a care for anything, you couldn't find anyone who could deal with me. Then I followed you all the time, swaying around you all the time, giving you a smug look from time to time. I love this feeling the most, to be toyed with and trampled on. Such exhilaration can't be described with words or words. It's the ultimate exhilaration." Yunyang was speechless. Wu Lai had been tortured by him for so many years, yet he had not broken down and gone mad. He could still act in an upright manner. It was not easy to have such a strong temperament. He could endure what others could not. Still, it was not an easy feat. Shen Yusher laughed heartily. "Not only in the past but now and in the future I have to follow him and watch him. I have to see how he hates me to the core, how he can't do anything to me despite knowing everything. Isn't he a good official? I'll let him be good till the end. I'll be living in such an atmosphere for the rest of my life. His wife and son are all like that. Even if he wants to risk his life, he can't bear to die, because his family still needs him to take care of them." Shen Yusher guffawed. Exhilaration. This is the best. When Wu Lai dies, I'll find another one like him and do the same to him. This is the most exhilarating thing in this world. Shen Yushe began to talk endlessly as if it was the proudest thing in his life, explaining it in detail. Obviously, he was filled with a sense of accomplishment. However, Yun Yang did not want to listen anymore. How could such a deranged thing make this guy so happy? Clearly, he was completely inhumane. Other than Sir Wu, I would also like to know who Sir Shan is in the Four Seasons Tower. What secrets are hidden in this secret chamber? Yun Yang said, I believe that the reason for my death is closely related to these 2 points. If I can't figure it out, I won't be able to rest in peace. Shen Yushe thrust the sword in his hand forward and pressed it against Yun Yang's throat. With a slight force, a trickle of blood seeped out of his throat. Shen Yushe grinned menacingly. Why did you guess that I'm from the Four Seasons Tower? You can even limit my identity to 7, 8, and 9 months. Who are you? How do you know all this? Yun Yang answered in a low voice. I'm from the Merciless Tower. As for you, the reason I know so much about you is naturally because someone wants to kill you. How could I possibly investigate your background? I just didn't expect your cultivation base to be so high in today's atmosphere. You can't do anything to me if either of these are missing. It's a pity that I can't complete the mission, but I'm unwilling to die so carelessly. Shen Yushe could not help smirking as he watched Yun Yang flip his sleeve to reveal a gold token. The gold token assassin of the Merciless Tower wants to deal with me. You know that I'm from the Four Seasons Tower, but you still dare to act alone. How bold of you. Yun Yang said in a low voice. Other than being an assassin from the Merciless Tower, I'm also a citizen of Yutong. Sir Wu is Yutong's pillar. You deserve to die for being his enemy. Shen Yushe chuckled coldly. I was wondering how Wu Lai wouldn't be involved. So you're from Yutong. What you've done today is most likely a personal move. With this, the Merciless Tower doesn't even have a reason to pick a fight. You've died in vain today. It was obvious that Shen Yushe was still trying to strike at Yun Yang's heart, wanting to see Yun Yang break down completely. Yun Yang said, You even know the Merciless Tower's rules. You must be from the Four Seasons Tower. What day of the month are you? Shen Yushe grinned and said, I'll have to disappoint you to the end. I'm not the day of the month. Yun Yang's eyes narrowed as he cried out involuntarily. Impossible. If you're not from the Four Seasons Tower, how can you be so resourceful? Shen Yushe wore a faint sneer on his face as he said, Idiot, I've only said that I'm not the day of the month. When did I say that I'm not from the Four Seasons Tower? Today. I'll let you die knowing that this old man is the end of the 7th month. Yun Yang nodded. The end of the 7th month? That's the 30th of the 7th month. But why isn't this the day of the month? What's the point of squabbling over words? The mockery on Shen Yushe's face grew thicker as he said, So you don't even know the difference. It looks like you've died a foolish death. There are 2 hallmasters in the 7th month and a vice hallmaster is the end of the 7th month. There's no specific date. Shen Yushe's expression was eerily cruel. Do you understand now? I see. Yun Yang was enlightened. So there's a hallmaster and a vice hallmaster at the entrance of each month. Yun Yang said, The Four Seasons Tower is mysterious indeed. As for the secrets in this secret chamber, Shen Yushe said faintly, it's only some restrictive spells and the Four Seasons Tower's secret records. I don't think you'll be very interested in these, but I'll still tell you so that you don't have to be so muddle-headed when you leave. Am I not being very merciful? Of course, there's also a chance to soar into the sky. It's also here. However, you won't be able to see it anymore. Yun Yang nodded. I see. I was wondering why I could no longer conceal my spiritual energy once I entered this place. If not for this. In his heart, however, he was thinking, a chance to soar into the sky. Although it's only a small spiritual absorption formation, it's enough to suppress your strange cultivation method. Shen Yushe's gaze was merciless. Now, it's time to answer your question. Who sent you to kill me? I was almost fooled by you just now. Even if you're from the Empire of Yutong, the Merciless Tower's rules are extremely strict. Every order is strictly enforced and every word is law. You've come with a plan and you've even vaguely confirmed your identity as a member of the Four Seasons Tower. Yun Yang sighed. I can't hide it from you indeed. I've been too naive. Since you've told me your identity honestly, I'll tell you the truth. The one who gave the order this time is the Merciless Tower's higher-ups. Then who hired you to kill me? According to the Merciless Tower's rules, even if it's the tower's higher-ups, you can still know who the employer is. Otherwise, how are you going to pay? Shen Yushi asked. This was what he was most concerned about. Yunyang wore a conflicted expression on his face. Shen Yushi said patiently, "You're going to die today. Why do you have to abide by the rules? If you tell me the truth in a straightforward manner, I'll give you a quick death. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult for you to die even if you want to, haha." Yunyang frowned as if he had made up his mind after a long struggle and said in a low voice, "All right, actually, the person who wants to kill you is..." Shen Yushi could not help but focus his attention, his ears perked up as well. His heart was filled with resentment. "As long as I know, I'll..." Before he could think of anything malicious, he suddenly heard an extremely unexpected name. Perhaps it was a word. Me. Shen Yushi was confused by the name. He then saw the person in front of him retreating abruptly, trying to escape the sword energy's lock. Shen Yushi's mind raced as he understood what Yunyang meant. With a furious roar, the sword energy of his long sword exploded. How could you escape when you're so close? Do you think you can escape when there's only a moment's difference? No, you'll only die a worse death. You'll die in pieces. However, Shen Yushi realized that the person in front of him had disappeared at the very next moment. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. There was no trace of him at all. "You shouldn't have let me be so close to you." A cold voice rang faintly. Shen Yushi suddenly felt a scorching heat. What he saw was a ball of flame. Boom! This ball of flame had already completely attached itself to his body, and was currently crackling as it continued to burn. The flames on his body erupted abruptly. Arg! Shen Yushi cried out in agony. He sucked in a deep breath. The air of vitality that was stored deep in his dantian erupted to its limit. He was obviously activating a mystic art, wanting to extinguish the flame with the force of his vitality. However, a wisp of flame entered his mouth as he inhaled. With a soft boom, black smoke began to billow out of his orifices. Ugh! Shen Yushi was suffering the internal and external burns of the flame. His gut-wrenching cries rang out incessantly. Helpless, he tossed his long sword to the ground with a clang. His body rolled over a dozen times on the ground in an instant. In reality, Shen Yushi had activated at least 4 to 5 mystic arts in that split second, attempting to dispel the internal and external fires. However, the flames burned fiercely and could not be extinguished or dispelled. A moment later, the fragrance of roasted meat rose from Shen Yushi's body. "Here! Supreme Flame! You! This is impossible!" Shen Yushi shrieked in agony. His body was still rolling around as the flames burned more vigorously. However, the raging flames only burned Shen Yushi's body. Apart from that, the entire secret chamber was not affected by the flames at all. Not even a piece of paper was damaged. Shen Yushi leaped up and dashed out in a frenzy. However, the flames wrapped around his body turned into long strips that bound his legs. As they burned, they pulled in the opposite direction. The muscles on his legs were almost instantly charred due to the clash of forces. Shen Yushi fell to the ground and could no longer get up. Unwilling to give up, he propped himself up with his hands and crawled out with all his might. However, as the flames continued to burn, his fingers were scorching white. With a cracking sound, his finger was burnt off. Chapter 234. Shen Yushi cried out, but a gust of flame spewed from his mouth, accompanied by charred powder. Although his mystical skill was strong, how could he withstand the flames burning his internal organs? Burned by the endless flames, he closed his eyes and smashed his head onto the floor of the secret chamber. Please, give me a quick death. Ugh! Another gust of flame rose from his body. His body convulsed a few times, moaning sounds coming from his throat. Suddenly, with a swoosh, the flame left his body. There was not even a wisp of smoke left. It circled in the air and turned back into Yunyang, landing on the ground. However, the moment he landed, Yunyang could not stand steadily and staggered, his face as pale as a sheet. Obviously, he had turned into his fire form and fought with all his might, successfully defeating his enemy. The price he had paid was not small, but it was fortunate that it was worth it. After all, he had managed to keep his target here. Actually, Yunyang had never thought that he would lose this battle. Although he knew that his opponent's cultivation base was higher than the 6th peak that he had just broken through to, perhaps by more than a level, he still had absolute confidence that he could defeat his enemy. As Yunyang's cultivation base improved, the power of his various forms had improved tremendously as well. As long as he played his trump card, he would definitely lose, even if he were to face a 9th peak expert. What truly troubled Yunyang was the fact that the gap between their actual abilities still existed. Victory was victory, but he could not make his target stay. Just like what Shen Yushe had said, there were plenty of secret passages in this secret chamber that could be used to escape. With his opponent's cultivation base, he only needed a chance to escape. Facing his opponent's cultivation base that was more than a level higher than his, Yunyang could not stop him at all. Once Shen Yushe escaped, the secret might be leaked. At the very least, he would alert his enemy and cause endless trouble. Therefore, Yunyang had intentionally created such a scene. Firstly, it was to probe for information, but it was only a side effect. His real goal was to get within 5 feet of Shen Yushe. Only in this way could he have absolute confidence and 100% chance of victory. Indeed, he had succeeded in one go. In spite of it, Yunyang was exhausted. On the ground, Shen Yushe had been burnt to a crisp. His eyes had been burnt into 2 black holes. If an ordinary person had been in this state, he would have died more than 10 times over. However, Shen Yushe's cultivation base was so profound that he was still breathing. He was still groaning involuntarily, his body convulsing. With a wave of Yunyang's hand, a gust of icy wind blew against his face. With a flick of his hand, Shen Yushe stopped moving. When he opened his mouth, black smoke came out of his mouth, and he coughed weakly. Of black smoke escaped from his mouth as he coughed. As he coughed, black smoke came out of his mouth. An expert at the 8th peak of mystical qi is indeed extraordinary. He's still alive even in this state. Shen Yushe. Yunyang said faintly, Shen Yushe, can you still hear me? Shen Yushe's mind was already muddled, but the last stubborn thought in his mind converged into disbelief. No. Impossible. Impossible. How could it be? Supreme Flame. His voice was weak, but the incredulity and disbelief in his voice were still as clear as ever. With just a glance, Yunyang was certain that Sir Shen's consciousness was almost gone from the burn. Now, there was only a lingering sense of obsession left. What puzzled Yunyang was, why is he so sure that I can't be Supreme Flame? He has never doubted that I'm one of the 9 Supremes even though I've been here for so long. This could be said to be extremely unusual. After all, his fire manifestation attack was Supreme Flame's fiery star technique. It was not a lie. How can it be? Supreme Flame. I watched them die with my own eyes. I did it with my own hands. Shen Yushe's voice was weak. Even now, he was still in intense disbelief. Yunyang suddenly jerked and turned around abruptly. Looking at Shen Yushe's dying body, an unprecedented murderous aura suddenly burst forth. An extremely intense and violent hatred suddenly surged out of him. Watched them die with his own eyes? Personally? Yunyang raised his saber angrily. If so, why do you still want an afterlife? The divine edge fell with a swoosh. The moment the saber fell, Emmy's energy was already attached to the divine edge. With a swoosh, Shen Yushe's charred head tumbled to the ground. Just as his soul energy left his body, it was struck by a ball of green light and vanished without a trace. His soul was annihilated. His soul was destroyed. He was beyond redemption. Personally. With my own eyes. Yunyang sucked in a deep breath, still feeling his body trembling. The dead man in front of him was the first of the masked men Yunyang had found during the battle at Tianxian Cliff. No wonder he had never doubted that Yunyang was one of the 9 Supremes. Only those who had watched the 9 Supremes die with their own eyes and killed the 9 Supremes with their own hands could have such thoughts and such confidence. Damn it! Yunyang panted and only managed to calm himself down after a long time. Suddenly, he laughed into the sky. Brothers, I've found one. I've killed one. His emotions were surging. I only hate the fact that I don't have the ability to capture him alive. If I could, I would definitely know more clues. And I'll work hard to make him live a long life. Yun Yang gritted his teeth and abruptly kicked Shen Yusher's corpse into smithereens. His bones were crushed into dust. Death was the most important thing. Normally, people would not do something like torturing a corpse. Usually, Yun Yang would not even bother to do it. However, Yun Yang hated that he could only kick Shen Yusher once. He wished that he could resurrect Shen Yusher and kill him again and again. He wanted to let him experience the feeling of being crushed into pieces over and over again. Even so, his hatred was not appeased. Who? After a long time, Yun Yang walked slowly to the table and sat down. There must be something more to this secret chamber. Yun Yang forced himself to calm down and focus his attention on the table. The surface of the table was made of a flat piece of white jade, suppressing the papers and other items underneath. Yun Yang passed the piece of white jade to Emmy. Underneath the white jade was a piece of worn-out Shen beast skin. It was unknown what it was made of, but it looked like an incomplete map. As far as the eye could see, it was covered in smoke and fire. It must have been very old, at least quite a few years old. Yun Yang picked up the piece of leather and tried to tug at it with his hand, but surprisingly, it did not budge. He could not help but feel puzzled and used more strength to tug at it, but it still did not budge. More strength, more strength. Even when Yun Yang had exerted his sixth peak cultivation base, the strange skin did not budge at all. What skin is this? Yun Yang was shocked. With Yun Yang's current physical strength, even the skin of a 9th-level mystical beast would not be able to withstand it. The continuous pulling just now would have torn it into countless pieces. However, this piece of skin was not damaged at all. There was not even a trace of it being stretched. Yun Yang was greatly moved. This piece of skin was already a rare treasure. The content recorded on it must be even more valuable. Upon closer inspection, he realized that this piece of skin was only a corner of the entire map. The edges were very smooth as if it had been cut by a sharp blade. A weapon that can cut such a tough skin must be no ordinary weapon. What would be the content recorded on the skin? A treasure map? A mysterious place? Or perhaps, some cave abode? An ancient ruin? Yun Yang's imagination ran wild as his imagination ran wild. Could this be what Shen Yusher called a chance to ascend to heaven in a single bound? However, it was still possible for him to find the place marked on the map with only a small portion of the map. Since it could not be turned into a useful resource immediately, he would put it aside for now. Yun Yang tucked the piece of skin into his robe. After all, there were still many follow-up steps to follow up on. There would be plenty of time to study this strange piece of skin in the future. What came next were some handwritten notes from Shen Yushan. He was very cautious in his actions, actually using code names to write everything. The information made Yun Yang's stomach churn. A certain day of a certain month, 9th day of the new year, accepted a job from the east, received 700,000 silver taels, codenamed 7,938 mission completed, reported in autumn. A certain day of a certain month. Similar information was written all over the page. Yun Yang's eyes were filled with circles as he read. There was only a stack of paper on the last page. The top of it read, 16 sides prepared, 10 sides ambushed, 9 sides attacked, driven into Tianxian Cliff. 4 sides attacked, heaven and earth reversed, heaven and earth reversed. 240 mystical cultivators work together to kill the 9 supremes, eliminating future troubles. This is to be remembered. The might of your reign. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter, for generations to come. These words were obviously about the 4 Seasons Tower's attack on the 9 Supremes. Yun Yang gritted his teeth and moved on to the next page. The content was exactly the same. The handwriting on each page was clear. Each stroke was serious and meticulous. Shen Yusher must have been extremely proud of this matter. He actually used the content on this piece of paper to practice his handwriting more than once. The dozens of records that followed were the same. Then, the content changed. This lowly official is only giving advice and liaising with the upper and lower levels, doing my best for the Tower Master for generations to come. I dare not claim credit. Then, it was a series of repetitions. This fellow was a hardcore fan of the 4 Seasons Tower. Does plotting against the 9 Supremes and plotting against them give you such pleasure? Yun Yang was infuriated. He smashed the 2 thick stacks of paper with a slap and pulled open the other drawers of the table to check them carefully. In one of the drawers, he found a complete route map. However, He could not confirm where it was because there were no markings on it. Looking at the folded marks, it seemed to have been opened and folded many times. Yunyang acutely felt that the map seemed to be rather useful, so he put it away carefully as well. Seeing that there were no other clues, Yunyang began to plunder without restraint. Yunyang was shocked by his loot when he got to the end. Chapter 235. First, there was silver. 12 million silver taels in silver notes and 2 million gold taels in gold notes. Just these two transactions alone were already a considerable amount of loot. Moreover, this was only the most ordinary harvest. Mystical stones, 3,700 pieces. Mystical crystals, 600 pieces. Mystical pills, 356 pieces of 5th grade mystical pills, 75 pieces of 6th grade mystical pills, 18 pieces of 7th grade mystical pills, and even 2 top-notch 8th grade mystical pills. Beautiful jade, 175 pieces. Yunyang opened a secret door at the corner of the secret chamber and realized that it was filled with all sorts of exotic treasures and treasures of heaven and earth. Yunyang was rather puzzled by this. This was only the Four Seasons Towers Hall of 7 months Vice Hall leader. Why did it feel like he had captured Supreme Lord Spring Frost? Could a mere Hall of 7 months Vice Hall leader really have such great authority and be able to collect so many treasures? It was a little too frightening. As there were so many items that he could not carry them all, Yunyang had given most of them to Emmy instead. He had made an exception this time, allowing Emmy to eat to its heart's content. Ayaya! Emmy was overjoyed, absorbing the energy within. It was only the time it took to brew 2 cups of tea, but Emmy had already absorbed the essence of the materials, leaving only piles of residue and powder on the spot. There were still plenty of exotic metals in the loot. Other than 30 to 40 pieces that Yunyang could identify, there were at least 17 to 18 pieces that he had never seen before. Bring all of these back and see how Bai Xueqi performs. If he's good, give them to him. Yunyang thought. If he doesn't, humph. Finally, Yunyang plucked all the luminous pearls embedded in the walls of the secret chamber like he was plucking a feather. When the secret chamber turned into darkness, Yunyang turned into the wind and left, returning with a bountiful haul. This trip was truly a fruitful one. Other than Emmy, who was swaying its head from eating, constantly in a state where it wanted to burp, Yunyang had snuck out with a huge backpack on his back. The huge backpack had been connected using a few bed sheets from Shen Yusher's house to gather all of the loot. These were all leftovers from Emmy's meal. Other than those whose levels were too high for Yunyang to bear to let Emmy eat, Emmy refused to eat the rest. However, to Yunyang, whether they were of a high or low level, they were all good stuff. Everything else aside, just the banknotes and gold notes alone. If 1 million taels could kill Supreme Lord Spring Frost, perhaps 10 million taels could kill Mr. Nyen? One must have the courage to think. What if they succeeded? Fortunately, it was already the 4th watch period. When Yunyang returned home, Lao Mei and Feng Mafei hurried over to help when they saw Supreme Yun returning home in such a humiliating manner. As for the great swordsman in white robes, he did not care about such a small matter, merely scanning it with his deific consciousness. Yunyang was glad that he did not come, glad that he did not see anything. If great swordsman Bai saw that there were so many suitable sword chi for him to cultivate, what if he shamelessly snatched them? I can't beat him now. There was no knowing what was in a man's heart. He had to be on guard. He then called Xue Wuyin over. Once Xue Wuyin saw that Yunyang had brought back so many items, he knew at once that Yunyang's trip had gone smoothly. Look at these papers. Yunyang shoved about half a sack of items to Xue Wuyin. Check carefully to see if there's anything valuable inside. Xue Wuyin was caught off guard and almost stumbled from the slap. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Yunyang's joyful cry. Ah, my little sweethearts are back. Meow meow meow. 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 Meow meow meow. For snow-white furballs that were all palm-sized kittens charged over happily and hopped onto Yunyang. Xue Wuyin immediately realized that he had nowhere to put his hands on now. There was one crouching on each of Yunyang's shoulders, one on top of his head, one hanging on his waist, and another hanging behind his buttocks. Yunyang laughed heartily as he hugged them in his arms. You've all worked hard this trip. Come, come, I'll prepare something delicious for all of you. I'll reward all of you well. Let this horse fellow do the hard work, let's go play. After saying that, He took the few little pom-poms and swaggered off, leaving in a carefree and unrestrained manner. Lao Mei and Feng Mafei were not surprised as they sorted the treasures Yun Yang had brought back into the storage room and stored them properly. Xue Wuyin, on the other hand, was speechless. "You're ordering me around like a worker. You're really impolite." After a sigh, Xue Wuyin returned to his room with a pile of papers that he did not know what had been written on them, studying them one by one. This was a meticulous task. Xue Wuyin felt that there was probably no one more suitable than him in this world. However, the 9 heavens dictum still needed to be dispatched. Right now, Yun Yang was cultivating. The cultivation this time was very different from the past. Emmy had eaten its fill during the incident earlier and was in an unprecedentedly joyous mood. The spiritual qi it exuded was unprecedentedly abundant as well, so much so that it was unstoppable. 4 eclipse panthers and a lightning cat snuggled into Yun Yang's embrace. All 5 critters were safe and sound. Yun Yang could clearly feel the 5 little fellows' bellies against his skin, rising and falling with their breaths. It was probably a warm and comfortable atmosphere. Yun Yang had also entered a deep recuperation state. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th whiteys had suffered internal injuries of varying degrees during the ambush. If they had relied on the self-recovery of high-level mystical beasts, they would have to recuperate for at least a few months. They were still young beasts after all, so their self-recovery mechanisms were slightly different. However, with Emmy's relentless outpouring of qi of vitality, they had all recovered within an hour. Then, the 5 whiteys shed their fur at the same time. Yun Yang sat cross-legged as he cultivated. He did not know that his body had been submerged by the whiteys shedding layer after layer of white fur. He only felt that the mystical qi in his cultivation today was unusually active. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth surged into his meridians and swiftly gathered in his dantian. The speed of the process was unimaginably fast. The qi of vitality that gushed out from his deific consciousness was also forcefully flushing his meridians. The mystical spiritual qi from the Kirin fish was also expanding his meridians. With these layers of assistance, the spiritual qi of heaven and earth surged over like a tidal wave. It gathered above the residence of Yun and disappeared in an instant, only to be replaced by another mass. That night, Xue Wuyin and Bai Yixue had only started cultivating after noticing that the atmosphere around them was not right. Although they had benefited considerably, it was far from what the other two could compare to. Lao Mei and Feng Mafei had seen the situation many times, so they naturally chose to drop everything at once and devote themselves to cultivating wholeheartedly. The sun was high up in the sky. Tiantang City was, of course, bathed in sunlight at this time of the day. In spite of this, the sky above the residence of Yun was shrouded in fog, blurring one's vision. It was a peculiar sight caused by the massive amount of spiritual qi that had been attracted to this place. Lao Mei, who had cultivated for an entire night, felt the meridians in his body expanding to their limits, as if his body was about to explode. Suddenly, a long howl resounded, as if it could pierce through the clouds and split the sky. The bones all over his body crackled and popped. When Lao Mei finally opened his eyes, his long hair billowed as 2 beams of light shot out from his eyes. 8th peak, breakthrough. Feng Mafei, on the other hand, was also brimming with green qi. He had already accumulated to the limit of 8th peak pinnacle. He was only a step away from the 9th peak. He only needed to wait for another opportunity and he could break through to the 9th peak realm. Bai Yixue was astonished as well, because his cultivation base had improved by leaps and bounds overnight, benefiting a lot from it. Putting everything else aside, he had expected that he would need at least a few days to recover from his remaining internal injuries. Unexpectedly, he had completely recovered in the blink of an eye. Then, in the face of the tsunami-like spiritual qi, even the great swordsman Bai, who had a super-high cultivation base, had a strange feeling that the spiritual qi was directly poured into his body before he could digest it. Was this still considered training? This was obviously a trend of advancing while lying down. This place was indeed marvelous, with so many opportunities. Bai Yixue's experience, cultivation base, and knowledge far surpassed Lao Mei, Feng Mafei, and even Yun Yang himself. Of course, he would not miss such a rare opportunity. He squeezed the space in his dantian with all his might, seizing the opportunity to improve his cultivation base. After all, with his profound cultivation base, it would be difficult for him to improve even an inch without decades of hard work. Bai Yixue had an extravagant hope for his current state. If he could continue, he might be able to break through the limit of perfection and reach the next level, the realm of a heaven mystic. If that was the case, even if he still could not defeat Jun Moyen, he would still have some confidence in moving up 2 or 3 places on the swordsman leaderboard and into the top 3. Bai Yishue's body was covered in a purple mist. He was really absorbing the spiritual qi of heaven and earth with all his might now. Perhaps, he was fighting with his life on the line. Xue Wuyin was also absorbing the spiritual qi of heaven and earth with all his might. Although he did not know where the spiritual qi of heaven and earth had come from, he would not miss such a godsend opportunity. As a member of the Eldar tribe, especially when his innate talent was lacking, it was more difficult than ascending to heaven for him to improve his cultivation base. The intensity of the spiritual qi and the air of vitality had given Xue Wuyin, who had long given up on cultivation, a strong sense of hope. He did not ask for much today. As long as he was able to heal his innate defect, he would be satisfied. As the sun rose higher, the commotion caused by the people grew louder. The fog in the courtyard slowly dissipated as well, clinging to the flowers and grass. Finally, Yun Yang felt as if his meridians, blood vessels, and bones were about to burst his body. He finally woke up amidst the excruciating pain. "Emmy!" Yun Yang huffed angrily as he panted with lingering fear. It was only then that Emmy realized that it had almost gotten into trouble again. It shrunk its branches, leaves, and vines, revealing only a tiny sprout as it peeked its head out. Ayaya! It actually looked embarrassed. And then... Chapter 236. Yun Yang's eyes widened, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Emmy had eaten too much last night and was overly excited. The air of vitality it exuded had far exceeded Yun Yang's expectations. It was not just 1 or 2 times more, but dozens of times more. The result of such an unexpected situation was that it had led to everyone's collective advancement. Yun Yang was the one who was most dissatisfied with the current situation. He had just broken through to the 6th peak of mystical qi 3 days ago. Although he had spent all his energy exploring these 3 days, his accumulation was shallow due to his lack of actual combat experience. He had only sparred with Lao Mei and Feng Mafei a few times. It was far from consolidating his foundation and stabilizing his current realm. The only real battle he had had was the one with Shen Yushan the night before. It was under such circumstances that Yun Yang, who was the direct beneficiary, still advanced from the 6th peak beginner mystical qi to intermediate level, ace, pinnacle, and then broke through to the 7th peak. He even advanced all the way to the 7th peak intermediate level. It would not be an exaggeration to describe his progress as skyrocketing. It was just that the advancement had caught Yun Yang off guard. Yun Yang thought in exasperation. It looked like his sparring sessions with Lao Mei and Feng Mafei would have to be faster and more brutal. He might even have to challenge Bai Yishuhe or something. Otherwise, he would not be able to make up for the step-by-step experience. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly felt... Pfft. Yun Yang spat out forcefully. What the hell is this? A ball of white fur had actually come out of his mouth. Yun Yang looked down. His eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. F***CKME. Yun Yang was tall. Although he was sitting cross-legged, he still had a considerable height. His entire body was almost buried by the fine white fur. Who knew how many times the 5 whiteys had shed their fur last night to accumulate to such an extent? Although Yun Yang was covered in white fur, even his nose and mouth had white fur seeping into it, he did not feel too repulsed by it. It was because each strand of white fur that had shed from the 5 whiteys was glistening with a delicate luster. According to Yun Yang's judgment, if he were to collect these white fur and use them as raw materials to make something, the quality would be extraordinary. It was a pity that Yun Yang did not have any talent in this field around him, so he could only sigh helplessly at the waist. He looked at the 5 whiteys in his arms and saw that they had all turned into smooth red meatballs. His little belly was still moving up and down, and he was sleeping soundly. In short, his condition was very good. Yun Yang sucked in a deep breath and channeled his mystical skill, carefully feeling the extreme agitation of his mystical qi. He felt that his meridians were circulating smoothly and his dantian was surging like the tide. He was in a great state. After all, the little ones had not woken up yet. If he were to move and wake them up, affecting their transformation or interrupting some mysterious evolution, it would be too much of a loss. Therefore, no matter how much he wanted to verify the progress of his ability, he only cultivated slightly and remained motionless, waiting for the 5 whiteys to wake up naturally. Lao Mei had made another breakthrough and was extremely excited. He jumped up and down, running back and forth in the courtyard, as joyful as a child. He was already old, his meridians were already set, and it would be difficult for him to break through. Now, however, it was as if he had been reborn and had the capital to move towards a higher goal. How could he not be excited? Xue Wuyin, Bai Yixue, and Feng Mafei stood quietly under the flowering trees in the courtyard, studying the yard that was almost foreign to them. The courtyard was still the same as before, but the scenery inside the courtyard, how could it change so much in one night? The flowers and trees that were planted in the courtyard were originally very ordinary, but now they were no less than 2 feet tall, and the crown of the trees was more than twice as large. Initially, it had only covered half of the pavilion, but now, the canopy hung down like a dome, covering the entire pavilion beneath it. The 4 sides were even more than that. Other than the flowering trees in the yard, the weeds on the ground had changed even more, all of them growing taller than a person. The path that had been trampled on was now covered in a new shade of green. To be more specific, the small drill ground where everyone had been sparring yesterday had now turned into a grassland. The grass was ankle deep. Moreover, the feeling of stepping on them was tender and soft, and he almost couldn't bear to trample on these budding lives. In just one night, the entire yard seemed to have undergone a drastic change. Yun Yang's small yard had only been planted with a few green vines at the base of the wall. They had only covered half of the wall. Looking at it now, the entire yard from the 4 walls to the roof was now covered with green vines. It was a sea of lush green vitality. Dewdrops were rolling on the grass, leaves, and petals. As the breeze blew, the rich fragrance of plants wafted through the air. It was already the winter season of the 11th month, but the fragrance of flowers wafted through the air. The ordinary residence of Yun's yard was like a fairyland on earth, filled with boundless vitality. As the 3 of them looked on, their eyes were filled with fascination. Such a vibrant and beautiful scene was rare in November. Even if it was a warm winter this year and the strong cold weather had yet to arrive, the surroundings were already bleak. How could there be such a scene? However, surprises came one after another. When Yun Yang finally walked out, even the calm and composed Xue Wuyin was dumbfounded. What was going on? How did the eldest become a white-haired man when he was cultivating? What kind of strange cultivation method was this? What was the use of cultivating it? The white fur on his body was fluttering everywhere. Yun Yang could not care less about the others' astonished gazes. He began to tidy himself up quickly. As a gust of mystical chi rose, the white fur on his body flew up at once. With a light wave of his hand, a gentle breeze spun and gathered all the white fur into a ball in the blink of an eye. Yun Yang then tossed the ball into the room. 5 tiny heads popped out from Yun Yang's embrace, blinking dreamily. Meow, meow, meow. The 5 whiteys' bodies were still smooth and red. They were licking their naked bodies with their tiny tongues. It was obvious that none of them were used to their current state. Why were they suddenly naked? Let's do a magic trick. Yun Yang grabbed the top of one of the whiteys and tossed it out. This fellow, whose luck was unknown, was Big Whitey. Big Whitey meowed. Meow. Suddenly, it flipped in the air and a layer of long white fur grew on its naked body. It landed on the ground like a pom-pom and rolled around in the emerald green grass. The 4 of them watched with widened eyes. Just by tossing it away, all its fur had grown back? Was this really a magic trick? Swoosh. Another whiteys was tossed out. It was covered in fur as well, snorting in dissatisfaction before it went to Big Whitey and rolled around. The other 3 whiteys did the same, returning to their original forms. The 5 bundles of fur balls rolled around on the ground, looking extremely adorable. The scene was truly adorable. In spite of this, Yun Yang noticed that the intelligence in the 5 fellows' eyes had increased. Their gazes were filled with intimacy and adoration. Yun Yang felt a sense of accomplishment. The 5 whitey lightning cats were considered to have been reborn and had greatly surpassed the lightning cat's innate shackles. Yun Yang would not be surprised if they could break through to the level of a 7th-level mystical beast in the future. Just the fact that Whitey 5 had shrunk again after its advancement and was still a small white cat that weighed 3 to 4 catties was enough to tell the story. Although it was still slightly bigger than the Eclipse Panther cub, the difference in size was no longer obvious. As for the 4 Eclipse Panthers, Yun Yang was even more satisfied. Emmy had changed the foundation of these four fellows once again, increasing their potential. Yunyang believed that each of these four fellows could advance to 9th-level pinnacle mystical beasts. Moreover, this conclusion was only limited to these four little fellows. It stopped at the current foundation. Who knew how many times they could go through similar baptisms of origin chi if they stayed by Yunyang's side? Their ultimate achievement would be truly limitless, unimaginable. There was something else that interested Yunyang more about the four whiteys. After this evolution, the four Eclipse Panthers had returned to their natural state. As long as the four little fellows did not reveal themselves intentionally and maintain their current size, it would be extremely rare to find someone who could recognize their true identity, if not the only one. This was the unique concealment ability of 9th-level pinnacle mystical beasts. Feng Mafei walked over, his eyes filled with surprise as he looked at the four whiteys and asked in a low voice, "Young master, these four fellows, are they?" Yunyang answered, "They have indeed improved a little, but they haven't truly matured yet. They're still far from the stage where they can roam the world and dominate an area." Roam the world and dominate an area. Feng Mafei understood the progress of these fellows at once. He sucked in a deep breath, his eyes filled with awe. Yunyang's evaluation was a little too humble. With the four whiteys' current strength, any one of them alone would be at the level of an 8th-level beginner mystical beast. Furthermore, the Eclipse Panther's innate movement speed had been enhanced by Emmy to an unbelievable level, allowing it to go anywhere in the world. For some reason, Emmy was biased towards the five little fellows, sparing no effort to elevate their attributes. Looks like these five fellows are the ones who have benefited the most this time. Yunyang smiled and shook his head. The five fur balls rolled on the ground for a while before Big Whitey suddenly straightened its body, its ears twitching as it looked at the sun in the sky, its eyes squinting into a line. It walked a circle on the ground with its elegant cat-like steps and licked the other whiteys. The four little guys sat motionlessly, and only their ears twitched as they stared at Big Whitey. Meow. Big Whitey meowed and suddenly turned into a ray of white light, dashing out of the residence of Yun's wall and vanishing in an instant. The other four little fellows were still sitting motionlessly, their eyes fixed on the direction that Big White had left in, and their tails were all standing straight up at the same time. After a long time they drooped. One of the whiteys came to Yunyang with the same elegant cat-like steps and tugged at Yunyang's robe with a tiny paw. It raised its head to look at Yunyang. There was an obvious questioning look in its eyes. Yunyang felt like his heart was about to melt as he laughed and said, "Go look for it if you miss it. As long as you complete your daily training, you can go play with it any time in your free time." Once they heard him, the four fellows leaped in joy, scurrying around in the air and meowing. Bai Ishue's eyes widened. "They can actually understand what you're saying?" Looking at the four seemingly ordinary lightning cats, Bai Ishue was perplexed. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, he would not have believed it to be true. So what if they can understand? Yunyang snorted and said, "I still have to send them to school after some time. Even if I let them learn the ways of being an official, it's still better than these fellows who know nothing but chatter, infighting, framing and fighting for fame and fortune. Let them learn more. At least when the enemy comes in, these fellows can fight until the last moment." Bai Ishue rolled his eyes and walked away. He felt that talking to such a crazy guy was really lowering his own style. "We need to do something tonight." Yunyang looked at Lao Mei and Feng Mafei. When the two of them heard this, their faces revealed an expression of eagerness to try. They had not gone out on a mission for such a long time and had been cultivating non-stop. Their bodies were almost rusty. "Feng Mafei, I need you to do something beforehand for this." Yunyang leaned close to Feng Mafei's ear and whispered. Feng Mafei was stunned for a moment before he almost laughed out loud. He said, "Don't worry, young master. Leave this to me. There won't be any problems. Wuyin, stay at the residence of Yun. Just do what you have to do. No need to care about anything else. Everything will go according to the plan we've agreed on." Yunyang looked at Shui Wuyin. "Still be careful. Don't ask for merit, just don't make mistakes," Shui Wuyin added. Looking at Shui Wuyin, Yunyang suddenly thought of something and said in a low voice, "Wuyin, let me ask you something." "What is it?" Shui Wuyin asked. "If I were to capture someone, you..." Yunyang said slowly. Before he could finish, Shui Wuyin understood what he meant and said, It's not a problem to torture them for 2 to 3 months or even longer. However, if you want to interrogate them, they have to be in the form of a deific consciousness. Yunyang rolled his eyes and said angrily, "Those who are in the form of a deific consciousness are almost at Ling Xiaozui's level. Can I capture them? What you said is as good as not saying anything." Xue Wuyin said sheepishly, "This can't be helped. My cultivation base isn't there yet. If I were to reach the stage where my soul can leave my body and roam the moon..." Yunyang pointed at him and said, "Stop, you'd better go and settle those things. Those are serious matters. If you had the stage where your soul could leave your body and your soul could roam the moon, wouldn't you be at Ling Xiaozui's level? You could just kill them head-on. Why would you need to interrogate them and practice nonsense?" Xue Wuyin left in embarrassment. Tonight, there were 2 targets. Chapter 237. However, these 2 targets could only be attacked at night. There was not much to do during the day, so Yunyang left leisurely. Today seemed to be the day to ease His Majesty's nerves again. With his current cultivation that had advanced by leaps and bounds, he should be able to make the Emperor feel more comfortable. As for the poison, he should be able to suppress it a little more. Shen Yushi's sudden disappearance and the strange secret chamber that appeared in his house had, of course, attracted the intense attention of Yutong's higher-ups. However, His Majesty and Qiu Jianhan were well aware that the 9 Heavens Dictum's news had arrived. Shen Yushi, the 4 Seasons Tower's 7 Moons Vice-Hallmaster, involved in the murder of the 9 Supremes, the evidence is conclusive, His Majesty sighed deeply. Old Qiu, what kind of organization do you think the 4 Seasons Tower is? How? His Majesty was speechless, his fingers trembling as he counted them one by one. Starting from Wu Wan Yuan until now. How many has this been? My ministers in the imperial court find such a thing every few days. And then another one every few days. Is this still my empire of Yutong? It has become the 4 Seasons Tower's word now. His Majesty was unprecedentedly frustrated, about to go mad. It would have been fine if I had found out about this myself. I would have beheaded these bastards in public and exterminated their families. But I didn't. If it wasn't for the 9 Heavens Dictum's help, who knows how long these people could have stayed hidden? Qiu Jianhan chuckled humorlessly and said, Your Majesty, if we had found out about this, perhaps the trouble would have been even greater. The wrinkles on his face deepened. The martial world's affairs, the martial world's, His Majesty scoffed and said. What martial world's affairs? Their murder of the 9 Supremes is equivalent to severing the empire of Yutong's national destiny. How can this still be considered a martial world affair? Wu Wan Yuan, Shen Yushi, and the rest are all important officials of the empire. Can they be considered martial world visitors? Qiu Jianhan sighed and said, Your Majesty, the difference between the imperial court and the common people is no longer clear now. The forces of the martial world have already grown. He sighed and didn't know how to comfort her. All under the heavens belonged to the king, and all who lived on the land belonged to the king. This was the foundation of a country, and it was also the most basic life creed of a king. And the principle of using martial arts to break the law was something that all those in power feared. However, after so many years, the various forces, sects and gangs in the martial world not only refused to submit to the rule of the king, but also grew stronger and stronger. It was no longer just a matter of being too big to deal with, it was an unshakable character. To the imperial power, this could be said to be a huge hindrance and a great threat. At the same time, it was a humiliation that was difficult to erase. And now, the various countries were at war with each other, restraining each other. They didn't have the time to deal with this Jianghu matter. There was something else that old Marshal Qiu did not say. If this went on for a long time, there would be some behemoth that could control the succession of imperial power, the change of dynasties, the rise and fall of the world. When that time came, the imperial power would be the true tragedy. It would be a situation that was sadder than the decline of the empire. To change this situation, the emperors of the various countries could only work together to set up the martial sciences and recruit the world's talents for their own use. Then they would have to spend a long period of time, perhaps even several generations of effort, to wear down the forces of the martial world bit by bit and bring them back under the imperial court's supervision. Only then could the situation be reversed and the forces of the martial world be digested completely. However, it was impossible for Yutong to carry out such a plan now. Once such a measure was implemented, it would definitely be strongly resisted by the civil officials. Even if the civil officials did not resist, It would be an unsolvable problem to keep the martial people in check when there were more of them. After all of this required a complete restructuring and reform to be possible. Looking at it now, it could be said to be completely hopeless and impossible. Old Qiu, how many people from the Four Seasons Tower do you think are left in the imperial court? His Majesty obviously knew that he was just grumbling. There was nothing he could do to change the current situation, so he changed the topic immediately. Qiu Jianhan sighed helplessly and said, "Let's not talk about the Four Seasons Tower's ultimate goal of murdering the 9 Supremes. Let's talk about how the Four Seasons Tower could set up such a trap with accurate intelligence in all aspects. Not only did they need the help of the political higher-ups, they also needed the help of the military higher-ups. In addition, if there wasn't the middle-ranking military who passed the information and the participation of the royals in the process, it would be difficult to achieve such a seamless operation. Other than that, they probably needed the help of a considerable number of people from the lower ranks." Old Marshal Qiu sighed. To complete such a huge plan, it's obviously not enough to just dig out a few people now. That's why. Before Marshal Qiu could finish, His Majesty had already sat down like a deflated ball. Qiu Jianhan's words were logical, straight to the point, and he had even given the conclusion that His Majesty did not want to hear. It was definitely not just these few people. There must be many more people. However, so what if he knew this? Even if he knew that there were many spies, he did not know who they were, let alone eradicate them. Your Majesty only needs to wait now. Now that the 9 Heavens dictum is on the move, I believe that many of the targets have already been exposed. When someone from the 9 Supremes shows up, it'll be more than halfway through this matter. Everything will be clear by then, Qiu Jianhan comforted him. I, the Emperor, am actually so useless that I can only wait passively, unable to help at all? His Majesty murmured. Old Marshal Qiu could only sigh in response to His Majesty's self-deprecation. Help. How do you plan to help? We don't even know if the people we're sending are from the Four Seasons Tower. How can we even talk about helping? For a moment, both of them were speechless. It was not that they did not want to speak, but they really did not know what to say. They could not even find the right words to comfort the Emperor. Therefore, when Yunyang arrived, he was greeted with such an unusually depressing scene. However, he did not say anything. There were some things that he could not ask as Marquis Yun's heir on the surface. Supreme Cloud could ask and even make decisions. However, Yunyang did not have the right to intervene. 20,000 miles away from Tiantang City, on top of a steep mountain, Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan were walking down with their guards. However, at this moment, only 18 of the nearly 100 guards who had returned from the Heavenly South region were left. Almost all of them were injured as well. As for their maids, not a single one of them could be seen. Yu Rulan was pale, her white robe stained with blood, while Ji Lingxi was panting, her face unnaturally flushed. Suddenly, the sound of flowing water came from the front. Everyone's eyes lit up. There's a mountain spring. Ji Lingxi cried out in surprise, licking her chapped lips. Everyone walked forward in a spurt of energy and found a small stream in the mountain. The water was extremely clean and clear. The group cheered, forgetting to keep their guard up as they pounced forward and drank the water in big gulps. I can't walk anymore. Ji Lingxi sat down on a small tree, gasping for air. After drinking the water, she felt energized, but at the same time, she felt extremely exhausted. Yu Rulan's body swayed before she slowly sat down on a rock beside her. She was obviously exhausted as well. Of the 18 guards, except for the 2 leaders who forcefully supported their bodies and called out to the others to gather their water sacks and fill them with spring water one by one, the rest of the guards all sat on the ground and panted heavily. A few of them rested for a while before going downstream to wash their necessities. It was unrealistic to wash them completely at this point, so they could only wash the important items first. At this time, everyone's bellies were full of water. When they walked, they felt their stomachs shake. Sister Lan. Ji Lingxi's mask was long gone, revealing the dark face she had when she was in Tiantang City. Only her eyes were still as bright as snow. I keep feeling that something isn't right along the way. It's really not right. Ji Lingxi panted and said, Ever since we set off to search for my brother, we've traveled almost half of the continent in these few years, but we've never encountered such a situation. Such a relentless pursuit. It's not normal. Yu Rulan pondered for a moment. Just as she was about to speak, she coughed, a trickle of blood trickling down the corner of her lips, but she wiped it away quickly as if nothing had happened. She said, "It's not just not right. There are too many strange things along the way." Yu Rulon said, "Ever since we were separated from our sisters, we've been being pursued, ambushed, all sorts of traps and ambushes. We've sent a message to our families for help, but they haven't come even after such a long time. However, these people who've been pursuing us obviously don't want to kill us directly. They have another goal in mind. I wonder what their real purpose is." Yu Rulon said, "There's always a way for us to escape each time we're in a hopeless situation, but the losses we suffer each time are unavoidable. Every time we're lucky enough to escape, we'll suddenly realize that the direction we've been heading in isn't right. As long as we head towards Tiantang City or even its surroundings, we'll be pursued immediately. It's not a coincidence that the cycle repeats itself." Yu Rulon said, "There's obviously someone manipulating us from behind the scenes. If there's no other purpose, then they're toying and torturing us on purpose." A cold glint flashed in Yu Rulon's eyes. "This is very strange." Ji Lingxi said, "What Sister Lan means is that someone doesn't want us to return to Tiantang City." Yu Rulon pondered and said, "Not necessarily. Perhaps there's some other reason behind this that we don't know about yet." There was a deep worry in her eyes. Suddenly she asked thoughtfully, "Lingxi, how old is your younger brother this year?" Chapter 238. Disgust colored Ji Lingxi's face as she said, "He's 17 this year, 2 years younger than me." Yu Rulon hesitated and said, "My brother is 23 this year." Ji Lingxi frowned and said, "Sister Lan, I only have respect for your brother." Yu Rulon smiled and said, "Of course I know that." She seemed to want to say something, but the words did not leave her lips. She only sighed softly. "Hopefully, I've guessed wrongly. Lingxi, if it weren't for your sudden breakthrough yesterday afternoon, I'm afraid both of us might not even know where we would be now." Yu Rulon let out a long sigh. Ji Lingxi was confused as well as she said, "You're not the only one, even I find it strange. I've just broken through to the 7th peak not too long ago, and now I'm suddenly breaking through to the 8th peak. Other than being a little excited at first, the rest of it was all guesswork and a little scared. What's there to be afraid of? Breaking through is always a good thing, especially for us right now." Yu Rulon smiled and said, "You've gained the most from this trip. Before we came out, your cultivation base was only at the 4th peak, but it hasn't even been a year and you've already broken through to the 8th peak. Breaking through 4 levels in a year, and you didn't even rely on rare treasures of heaven and earth or spiritual pills. This is the first time I've heard of such progress." Ji Lingxi was full of doubts as well. She mumbled, "I don't know what happened earlier. I only saw that you were about to be captured and I didn't know where the strength came from, but I charged over without a care. Only then did I realize that I've broken through. I didn't even feel the breakthrough then. Until now, I still feel like I'm dreaming. I can't believe that I've really reached the 8th peak. Sister Yu, do you think there's any hindrance with my current cultivation base? Will I fall back to the 7th peak after a few days?" Yu Rulon only hummed in response and did not answer. While it was strange, both girls were not experts in this field. Despite their family background, they had never heard of such a thing. He really couldn't tell what the pros and cons were. He could only hide this doubt in his heart and ask when he met someone who understood. Just as Yu Rulon had said, Ji Lingxi's sudden breakthrough to the 8th peak was a good thing for the current situation. However, if the martial experts, such as Ling Xiaozue and Dugu Chou, were to find out about this improvement, their eyes would pop out of their sockets. After a short rest, everyone's mental strength had recovered somewhat. Ji Lingxi washed her face with the mountain stream water and took a deep breath. "Sister Lan, let's go." Yu Rulon smiled faintly, a hint of sadness on her face as she said, "I'm afraid we can't leave anymore." Her eyes looked at the sky through the dense treetops. Ji Lingxi followed Yu Rulon's gaze and looked up. In the sky, a giant crimson bird was circling back and forth, letting out a shrill cry. He actually caught up again. Ji Lingxi gritted her teeth in hatred. Those pursuers were really like ghosts that refused to leave. Yu Rulon looked worried. If she had guessed correctly, this short rest was probably a gap that the other party had purposely left for them. "Lingxi," Yu Rulon said urgently in a low voice. Remember what sister you said? If we're separated, don't look for me. Don't go home and don't go to my house. Yu Rulon said resolutely. Go straight to Tiantang City and look for Yun Yang. In the future, don't do anything else, don't care about him. Ji Lingxi kept quiet for a bit, a cold murderous intent gleaming in her eyes as she said, Sister Lon, so you've guessed it too? Yu Rulon sighed deeply. Yes. Something must have happened to our family, or perhaps, someone from our family wants to deal with us. We've been away all these years, ignoring our family's orders. I'm afraid we've incurred the family's displeasure. I'm afraid they won't let us go this time. Yu Rulon said, My heart is dead now, but you're different. Ji Lingxi gritted her teeth and said, Sister Lon, I have an idea. What idea? Yu Rulon asked. Split up. Ji Lingxi said, But it's not the separation you're thinking of. We'll go our separate ways from the guards. Both of us will go together, hiding our tracks and escaping quietly. Yu Rulon shuddered. We'll still be too big of a target if we go together. We'll live together and die together. Ji Lingxi gritted her teeth and quickly gathered the guards to make some simple arrangements. Then she took out her and Yu Rulon's sachets and cut it open, allowing the guards to carry the spices with them. Everyone, take care. If we don't go with you, perhaps your chances of escaping will be higher. If you run into danger, there's no need to fight with your lives on the line. The priority is to stay alive. Let's split up and meet up in Tiantang City. Ji Lingxi ordered. Go! Ji Lingxi's decisiveness in this critical moment stunned Yu Rulon. Before she could react, she was pulled into the bushes by Ji Lingxi. Along the way, the grass, roots and leaves were plucked by Ji Lingxi and rolled into a ball in her hand. She then rubbed it fiercely. Then she smeared the juices on both their bodies and faces. These juices are enough to get rid of the smell on us. Then we'll go back. It's a surprise. Ji Lingxi gritted her teeth. No matter what, we can't let them succeed. The crimson bird that had appeared out of nowhere was still circling in the sky, making all sorts of postures to give directions. However, its postures were no longer as orderly as before. They were rather messy. To be more precise, it was giving directions everywhere. The targets on the ground were completely scattered. It was obvious that the beast was dumbfounded. The people who were rushing over were all dumbfounded when they saw the bird's postures in the sky. What was going on? There should only be one direction of escape. Even if they split into two groups, there should only be two directions. However, according to the crimson bird's signal, there seemed to be 7 or 8 directions. Could it be that their people were everywhere? How many of them were left now? However, there were also people who were familiar with the crimson bird's habits. They reacted after a moment of confusion. They should have split up and run in different directions. Wouldn't that be what the crimson bird indicated? Send the signal immediately. Narrow the encirclement and surround them. Don't let anyone go. The enemy's hundreds of people immediately rushed into the mountain and launched the most rigorous search. One of the young men in white looked grim. If they were completely scattered like this, the spies he had planted would be completely useless. Ji Lingxi pulled Yu Rulon along as they walked back as carefully as they could. The direction they had intended to head in was already a mess now. Noises could be heard from time to time. Each time there was a commotion, it meant that one of the 18 people on their side had been discovered, captured, or killed. Both the girls' expressions were grim. It was heavy. Occasionally, they would glance at each other and see the seriousness and doubt in each other's eyes. What they could be sure of now was that something had gone wrong with their families. But what exactly had gone wrong? They were still baffled. On the same night, when Han Wufei left the residence of Crown Prince, he seemed rather preoccupied. The tower's higher-ups had been coming one after another during this period of time. The situation made Han Wufei feel that something big was about to happen. What could it be? Why would so many higher-ups of the tower gather in Yutong's capital? It was inexplicable. Other than the Four Seasons Tower's matters, there was also the matter of the residence of Crown Prince that he was responsible for. The Crown Prince had used a very far-fetched reason to forcefully take it away from him and hand it over to someone else. Although Han Wufei was still the Crown Prince's advisor in name, he was actually idle and had become an advisor in name only. Sitting in his own house with nothing to do, Han Wufei could not help feeling like he might as well go home. His wife and children were all in his secluded villa. It had been a long time since he had seen them. Should he make use of this time to go back? Han Wufei asked the kitchen to prepare a few dishes and drank by himself. He did not know why, but his desire to go home was growing stronger. After a few glasses of wine, the feeling was like a wildfire that could not be controlled. I'll bid farewell to His Highness tomorrow morning and go back for a short stay. The capital situation is strange anyway. It's good for me to leave temporarily, Han Wufei decided inwardly. Just as he was making up his mind, a sudden gust of wind blew and a loud explosion came from the door. That was because the entire door had been smashed into smithereens in all directions. A few guards of the residence were the first to bear the brunt of the impact, their faces bloody and mangled from the flying splinters. The unforeseen event this time came abruptly and without the slightest sign. A black silhouette charged in from the door like a phantom, carrying a boundless murderous aura. All the lanterns along the way were extinguished, bringing endless darkness to the residence of Han. The uninjured guards of the residence of Han went forward together, intending to stop the intruder, but the intruder charged at them like a whirlwind, like a dragon that was overturning the seas and rivers. As the cold gleam flashed, blood spurted into the air. Han Wufei, who was in the room, could hear the sound of the incoming weapon slicing through the air. He knew that the newcomer was not friendly, so he dashed out of the room with a whoosh. Unexpectedly, the masked man in black dashed to him like a hot knife through butter, accompanied by a rain of blood. The masked man's palm was like a knife as he slammed it down. There was not the slightest bit of sloppiness. Behind him were the residents of Han's guards who had been flung out in all directions, but they had yet to land on the ground. Everything happened abruptly, and it was also extremely fast. The palm fell with the force of a collapsing mountain. Chapter 239. Everything happened abruptly, and it was also extremely fast. Han Wufei watched as the killing blow approached, but he remained calm in the face of danger. His left hand parried swiftly while his right hand pulled out the sword. Just as he was about to counterattack, he felt a tremendous force surging towards him from where his left palm was parrying. His entire body stepped back involuntarily, feeling as if a mountain was pressing down on his chest, suffocating him for a moment. He took 7 steps back, only to realize that the sword in his hand had not even been thrust forward. An 8th peak expert? Shocked, Han Wufei hollered. Who are you? As the saying went, a small clue would reveal the general trend. An expert would know the presence or absence of a hand. It had only been one move, but Han Wufei had already determined that the other party was an 8th peak cultivator who was stronger than him. In spite of this, Han Wufei was still composed. As he retreated, his left hand shook and a fire arrow shot into the sky, exploding hundreds of feet in the air. He had sent out a distress signal at once. As long as he could buy himself some time, he would be able to get help. When the black silhouette saw Han Wufei, a strange glint flashed across his eyes, but his attacks became even more ferocious, completely disregarding his own safety. His first move was successful, but he did not slow down at all. As if he had turned into a whirlwind, he pounced on Han Wufei again with renewed vigor. Palm after palm, each strike was like a giant axe splitting a mountain. He did not speak a word throughout the entire process, only focusing on his attacks. Han Wufei only managed to take 2 more blows before he was completely at a disadvantage. Thoughts flashed through his mind as he hollered. Who are you? Who are you? You should at least tell me your name if you're here. The black-clothed man still didn't say a word. He made a circle with his right hand, and there was actually a flash of lightning. Then, he smashed his fist down again. Han Wufei dodged swiftly, but the cold gleam in the other party's hand caught him off guard. Han Wufei could no longer avoid the attack. With a cry, a long wound appeared on his abdomen. Blood splattered and the wound was so deep that bone could be seen. A cold gleam flew out. It was the sword in Han Wufei's hand that had been sent flying by the other party. Han Wufei was a resilient man. He did not panic even in the face of danger, retreating continuously and dodging swiftly. Even when he was calm, it was clear that he no longer had the will to continue fighting. His fighting spirit and confidence had been completely obliterated by the other party's tyrannical attack. However, the black shadow chased after him like a shadow and continued to punch and kick him. The cold light was like a sword that appeared and disappeared unpredictably. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. It was like lightning flashing in the night sky, adding more wounds to Han Wufei's body. Blood dripped from Han Wufei's body. Although he tried his best to dodge, the wounds on his body had greatly depleted his stamina. With another loud cry, Han Wufei, who was forced into a corner, had nowhere to run. He chose to meet the man in black's palm with all his might. Han Wufei sucked in a deep breath and retracted his palms with all his might. A suction force suddenly appeared. In spite of it, Han Wufei was ruthless enough. Not only did he fight the stronger one with a weaker cultivation base and was injured, but he had also absorbed all of the force from both of them. He then forcefully converted the two forces into a retreating force. However, his meridians and internal organs were all heavily injured at this moment. As he spat out a mouthful of blood, his body flew up into the sky unsteadily. Han Wufei had calculated everything and paid the price of severe internal injuries to find this chance to escape by injuring himself first. How could he miss it? He stomped hard on a big tree and was about to shoot out like a bolt of lightning. As long as he could fly out, he would be out of danger. At the very least, he would have a chance to catch his breath. The person below him would have to disperse the residual force from the clash of forces as well, so he would not be able to catch up in time. However, just as he leaped into the air, a white silhouette flashed and appeared in front of Han Wufei's flying form. Han Wufei shrieked, terrified beyond measure. A gaping maw appeared before him. Han Wufei's body flew out, sending his head right into the gaping maw. The white shadow that appeared was a gigantic leopard. It was snow-white all over, appearing like a phantom. The leopard's mouth opened abruptly and let out a howl. Han Wufei screamed in despair. His vision darkened as his head was already in the strange leopard's mouth. Then, he felt like he was floating and knew nothing else. The Eclipse Panther's howl had bitten Han Wufei's head off. The headless corpse was still in the air, flying forward in accordance to Han Wufei's last will. At this moment, the situation was extremely strange and terrifying. After a long while, Han Wufei's corpse had stopped moving, but no one knew where it had landed. Screams that sounded like they had been scared out of their wits could be heard from afar, signifying the incident. The Eclipse Panther swayed its tail and landed on a tree. It opened its mouth and Han Wufei's head rolled off. The Eclipse Panther's gigantic body vanished in a flash. All that was left on the spot was gone. A palm-sized kitten appeared on the tree. It stretched out its paws and tried to slide down the tree. Its posture was extremely adorable, making people want to love it endlessly. As for the masked man in black, he had not lifted his head since Han Wufei had dashed out. He did not care about Han Wufei at all, rushing straight into Han Wufei's room and starting to rummage through the room. It was obvious that he was certain that Han Wufei was dead and there was no need for him to observe any further. Now, his main objective was to plunder his belongings. With a slam of his palm, the masked man entered in a flash. A moment later, the man in black dragged a huge bundle out like a bolt of lightning. Two loud bangs lingered in the air as the masked man killed the remaining Han family guards. Only then did he leave with the huge bundle, disappearing into the night. He came and went like a flash of lightning. It was only after he left that the fire in the residence of Han began to burn. Thick smoke billowed and the fire burned fiercely. After a while, two black figures rushed over at an extremely fast speed from afar. Is it Han Wufei's signal? This bastard! How dare he send out this tower summon signal in such an important place in Tiantang City? Is he looking for death? Let's go over and take a look first. Han Wufei is alert. Maybe he's really in mortal danger. Let's go! Oh no, there's a fire over there. It's coming from the residence of Han. Han Wufei is really in danger. I'm afraid it's too late. There's no sound of weapons clashing or fists clashing. There's a commotion over there. It's a headless corpse. Why does it look so familiar? Let's go over and take a closer look. Maybe there are other clues. When they took a closer look at the headless corpse on the ground, both of them were speechless. The clothes worn by the headless corpse were undoubtedly Han Wufei's clothes. But what about the wounds all over the body? The wounds on the body were obviously sword wounds. But what about the wound on the neck and head? It was definitely not cut by a sharp blade, but more like it was bitten off by a ferocious beast. This was strange. What kind of ferocious beast could do something like this in Tiantang City? No matter how weak Han Wufei was, he was still a 7th peak expert. What kind of mystical beast would it take to bite his head off? How could the corpse be tossed so far away? It was quite a distance away from the residence of Han. After a fruitless search, both of them came to Han Wufei's house and were surprised to find Han Wufei's head lying on the ground. It was fortunate that it had not been engulfed by the flames, lying face up on the ground. It was bitten off. One of them frowned. This is too strange. It looks like the house has been robbed. All the guards are dead. This is the prelude to the annihilation of the entire clan. There's no trace left at all. How are we going to track the murderer? Look over there, there should be a secret chamber in Han Wufei's house. It's over there, it's already broken. How could anything be left behind? Search it. Let's go back there quickly. It's more urgent there. Of course. Be careful, the murderer is still nearby. Both of them looked at the chaotic scene in shock and suspicion. They searched carefully, not letting go of any abnormalities on the ground. Each of them was on high alert. Immediately, an intimidating aura exuded faintly. It was then that meow. A weak, trembling meow of a cat could be heard. Both of them turned around instinctively to look at the source of the sound. There was a little kitten curled up on the tree, trembling in fear. Its tiny paws reached down tentatively, but it seemed like it dared not come down because the tree was too tall. It was truly adorable. Could this cat be from Han Wufei's house? One of them asked suspiciously. The other person waved his hand, and a gust of strong wind whooshed out. The kitten on the tree seemed to be startled by the sudden turn of events. It screamed and jumped down without a care in the world. Both of them dodged instinctively. The little white cat landed between them seemingly unintentionally. It lifted its head and looked at the two of them, its eyes filled with innocence and innocence. This cat is quite cute. Too bad it's a normal house cat, only a plaything and useless, one of them said, waving his hand to chase the cat away. His hands were exceptionally gentle, obviously charmed by the cat's cuteness. The kitten, on the other hand, seemed to be extremely frightened. In an instant, all the white fur on its body stood up. It suddenly let out a loud meow and raised its two little claws with a swoosh, scratching both of their legs. F***CK. Damn it! Both of them were shocked. The sudden claw tore their robes apart. Even the flesh underneath was scratched open with a few bloody gashes. They were flustered and exasperated, the tiniest bit of compassion thrown out the window. They wanted nothing more than to capture the kitten and make it into a bowl of cute tiger soup. Unexpectedly, the kitten let out a low meow and had already burrowed into the shadows like lightning, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. This speed was unimaginably fast and unimaginable. The wounds on their legs were bleeding profusely. How could a mere kitten cause such damage? Chapter 240. How could the two of them have imagined that a kitten that had not been weaned on its mother's milk could be so lethal? Caught off guard, they were caught off guard and fell into the trap. However, when they wanted to catch the kitten and beat it to death to vent their anger, they found that it was nowhere to be found. After cursing and swearing, they were no longer conflicted. After all, they were from the Four Seasons Tower. None of them were ordinary people. Han Wufei's accidental death was a fact, but the things he had left behind might leave some clues. Thinking of this, both of them tensed up, activating their mystical chi cultivation base and diving into the sea of fire. It was a pity that they cursed again after searching the place with great effort. Who was the one who did this? Why was it like a locust swarm had swept through the place? All the valuables had been swept clean, leaving nothing behind. It was even more thorough than a bandit's robbery. Even the other secret chamber within the secret chamber was empty. We have to go back and report this to the Lord quickly. Some news must have been leaked. One of them spoke hastily with a grim expression. That's right. Shen Yushir had just met with an accident a few days ago. That place is the most suspicious. The entire Hall of Nine Moons had just finished assembling. Just as they were about to be handed over to him, something happened at this juncture. Han Wufei has been inexplicably implicated as well. If the culprit is the same person, not only is he resourceful, he might even be targeting the Four Seasons Tower. You're right. Go back quickly. Both of them disappeared with a swoosh. On the other side, the assassination of Yang Buotao was not as easy as targeting Han Wufei. Yang Buotao was Yutong's military general. Purely in terms of status, he was only below Tai Zheng. He was one of the top 10 heavyweights in Yutong's military and was the marshal of the northern troop. Once this person was touched, there would be a great deal of repercussions. In other words, Yang Buotao was not on the same level as Shen Yushi, Han Wufei, and the others. Yun Yang and Feng Mafei sneaked into the residence of Yang. According to the plan, Yun Yang disappeared into the dark in a flash while Feng Mafei, who was dressed in black and masked, strode forward without saying a word. Ignoring any questions, he lifted his leg and kicked the door of the general's residence over. With a loud bang, the entire door flew into the sky. Then, Feng Mafei charged in with a long howl. Feng Mafei's current cultivation base was already at the pinnacle of the 8th peak. His ability was comparable to Mi Kongquan in his most powerful state, perhaps even superior. Now that he was unleashing his full power, the lethality was not to be underestimated. He killed his way in like a hot knife through butter, and all who obstructed him were swept away. Under normal circumstances, one's cultivation base of the 8th peak could be considered as a top-notch expert. With such skills, it was more than enough to snipe Tai Zhang, who was not within the range of the military formation. Therefore, Feng Mafei's one-sided massacre was not surprising at all. It was within reason. It was a pity that his aggressive advance did not last long. He had only taken a few steps into the second courtyard when he was met with an unusually strong obstruction. In the darkness, a few black shadows that had been hiding somewhere suddenly flew out like giant birds, pouncing at Feng Mafei from 7 to 8 directions at the same time. At the same time, a sharp whistle rang out. All the ordinary soldiers and generals in the general's residence disappeared, replaced by teams of elite troops clad in steel armor that emerged from the darkness. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. These people all climbed up the 4 high walls, and even the trees and roofs were densely packed. Cracking sounds could be heard as hundreds of steel bows were drawn to the fullest at the same time. Steel arrows were nocked, gleaming with a cold gleam. His momentum was unstoppable and terrifying to the extreme. Not only was Feng Mafei, who had been attacking aggressively, suppressed, he was also locked on by countless arrows. He was like a beast that had fallen into a death trap, turning from a predator to a prey. As the tables turned, the main room's door opened abruptly. Inside, a dozen men in green walked out with their arms behind their backs, their eyes glinting coldly as they focused on Feng Mafei's battle. Following them were 2 old men, one on the left and one on the right. They walked out slowly, calm and composed. The last one to appear was Yang Buotao, who stood in the middle. He was dressed casually, his physique tall and muscular, his face square, his eyes watching the scene like a hawk. "They've come," Yang Buotao ordered. "Light the fire." Following a loud boom, thousands of torches were suddenly lit up in the second courtyard of the general's mansion. The entire place was illuminated as if it was daytime, and even the slightest detail could be seen. From the moment the door was breached, Feng Mafei had only charged into the space of less than 1,000 feet. He had just entered the second courtyard when he was stopped. The weakest of the experts fighting with him now was at least of the 7th peak level. This was a ridiculous and extravagant lineup. Forget Tai Zheng's guards, even the 8 top-notch guards of Han Sanhe the other day were no better than this, perhaps even slightly weaker. How could Yang Buotao have such a strong lineup of guards? Feng Mafei dashed left and right, attacking ferociously, but he could not even break through the encirclement, what more to kill Yang Buotao. Even when he was in danger, Feng Mafei did not show the slightest hint of fear. He let out a thunderous roar, the sword in his hand swinging and closing, glinting coldly as he attacked with all his might. Swoosh! An arrow suddenly shot out from the roof, like a comet chasing after the moon, arriving in a flash. Be it the timing, direction, or angle of this arrow, every point was just right. The enemies on all sides had shifted and revealed Feng Mafei's silhouette. Moreover, the instant he stepped forward, it was as if a white steed had flashed across a crevice. Clang! Feng Mafei deflected the incoming arrow with a swing of his sword, the sword in his hand actually trembling as he felt a strong vibration in his wrist. He could not help blurting out, "Dia side bow." Not only was the arrow's landing spot perfect, the angle and timing were superb. Its lethality was equally shocking. It was an arrow from the Dia side bow. Someone among the attackers snickered coldly. "Not bad. You're quite knowledgeable. It's the Dia side bow." Dia side bow. The mystical steel arrow. It was rumored that the deicide bow was forged from the horn of a 6th-level mystical beast, the armored rhinoceros, and the bowstring was made from the beast's tendon. As for the mystical steel arrow, although the shaft was only forged from fine steel, the arrowhead was forged from the actual mystical steel. An ordinary shot that could shoot an arrow from 100 feet away was a joke to the archer who wielded the deicide bow. It was worthless. An ordinary bow and arrow could only be considered a super-strong bow if it had the strength of 8 stones and above. It could be said that it was invincible on the battlefield. However, the deicide bow required at least a strength of 30 stones and above to fully draw the bow. With such strength, even a cultivator who had reached the 3rd or 4th level of mystical chi would find it difficult to draw the bow perfectly. Not to mention the need to aim for a long period of time, maintain the stability of the bow, and fire continuously. It was even more difficult. However, once the archer of the deicide bow was successful, an arrow released would have the power to split rocks. If 10,000 arrows were to be released at once, even a grandmaster perfected expert would die under the arrows. If that was not the case, how would it be known as the deicide bow? The original intention of the deicide bow's creator was that even if the gods descended from heaven, they would be slain by such a bow and arrow. However, the materials for the deicide bow were extremely rare. An armored rhinoceros only had 2 horns, and 1 horn was just enough to make a deicide bow. Even if there was an extra horn, it would be difficult to make use of it, not to mention the restriction of the bowstring made from mystical beast tendons. Hence, this bow had always been used as a secret weapon in the military formation. It would only be used when they encountered a strong opponent, such as an invincible general like Shangguan Wudi. No one would have guessed that General Yang Buotao's house actually had more than 400 of them. Moreover, there were more than 400 archers who could control the deicide bow freely. Anyone who could use the deicide bow, at least to an archer, was definitely an expert among experts. The hearts of these archers had to be as calm as ice and snow. These people had always been the killing gods of the battle formation. They could move freely and decide when to release the arrow. Each of them had a unique mind and were unpredictable. However, once they released the arrow, an enemy general would definitely fall. After all, the mystical steel arrow that went with the deicide bow was also a rare and precious item. Any mistake would be a great waste. Feng Mafei's expression was indifferent, but he was actually groaning in his heart. To Feng Mafei, he had thought that he could go on a killing spree with his cultivation-based breakthrough and show off his prowess. In the end, he had fallen into an unprecedented trap the moment he came out. The situation was actually unprecedentedly dangerous. Putting aside the fact that the enemies that surrounded him from all directions had already trapped him and the chances of him breaking out were minuscule, those at the door who had yet to make a move must be even more terrifying. These people were enough to kill him over and over again. That was not all. There were still 400 to 500 deicide bows aimed at him. They're thinking too highly of me. They're practically treating me like Ling Xiaozue. Feng Mafei's emphasis on the deicide bow was higher than that of the people who were attacking him. As an assassin, he knew all too well the terrifying power of the deicide bow. If he were to be shot, he would be severely injured even if he did not die. His ability would be diminished. To him now, the deicide bow was like a demonic hand that could take his life at any time. It was difficult to avoid, helpless. Swoosh! It was another arrow. As Feng Mafei dodged it with all his might, he revealed a slight opening and was struck on his back. If it were not for his killer instinct that allowed him to deflect the force the moment he was struck, he would have been severely injured. Even so, he almost cried out in pain. The mystical steel arrow that had been evaded plunged into the ground with a swoosh. It went straight into the ground. Not even the tip of the arrowhead could be seen. It was completely embedded in the ground. Chapter 241. The moment Feng Mafei thought of this, he calmed himself down and his fighting spirit increased. Now that the situation was clear and there was a huge disparity between the strong and the weak, he believed that his young master would be able to make the right choice. As long as his young master did not force himself to attack, he would not be exposed. Even if he were to die here, it would be worth it. Of course, if he could drag a few of them down with him at the last moment, it would be even more profitable. Feng Mafei's long sword trembled and he suddenly let out a long howl. His voice was unprecedentedly fierce, piercing through the clouds and splitting the sky. The sword light that erupted was endless, rolling like a dragon as it dashed left and right. It was extremely valiant and imposing, forcing the 8 experts who were surrounding him into a disadvantageous position. He's fighting with all his might. Unfortunately, he's just trying to show off his bravery. He can only gain the upper hand for a moment before he falls back into a hopeless situation and dies in an instant. One of the people watching from afar smiled faintly. Before he finished speaking, someone beside him chuckled. It's such a big fight. It'd be a pity if he dies in a siege. Let me accompany him and have some fun. As soon as he finished speaking, he moved 80 feet away and was already above the battlefield. With a shout, a long saber appeared out of thin air. He swung the saber in a circle and wielded it like a hammer, smashing it down with the force of a mountain. Feng Mafei did not dare to be careless and defended with all his might. It was a pity that he had pushed his cultivation base to the limit and gained a temporary advantage. In reality, it was like drinking poison to quench his thirst and did not benefit the battle at all. Instead, he had expended a great deal of his vitality. Although he was not completely exhausted, he had lost much of his edge. The saber user who joined in later not only had a higher cultivation base than Feng Mafei, he aimed at the moment when Feng Mafei had used up all his strength and had yet to recover. He was bullying the weak, so how could Feng Mafei defend himself? With a loud crack, the sword in Feng Mafei's hand broke into 2. He spat out a mouthful of blood as he staggered backward unsteadily. Amidst this, a saber landed on his shoulder and a palm landed on his back. If Feng Mafei had not held on with all his might, he would have fallen to the ground. Feng Mafei's mind was still calm, but he felt his internal organs burning and his skills dissipating. There was only one thought in his mind. Young master, please don't appear. Please don't appear. Hurry up and leave. However, just as Feng Mafei had lost all hope and was no longer able to defend himself, a sudden gust of wind blew in the sky above the Yang residence without warning. In an instant, sand and pebbles were sent flying. Even the archers on the tree fell with a thud. In the blink of an eye, the hurricane that had swept through the entire area turned into a tornado, rushing towards Yang Buotao like a raging dragon. Someone in the crowd could not help but exclaim, "It's supreme wind?" Yang Buotao and the people around him glared at the person who had spoken, wishing they could cut him into pieces. A gale swept across the ground. The 2 old men beside Yang Buotao had gloomy expressions on their faces. The corners of their mouths revealed a hint of undisguised mockery. They took a step forward at the same time, and like 2 majestic mountains, they blocked the hurricane head-on. With a loud bang, the incoming wind was like a mountain crashing into it. Completely without any effect, it changed direction and soared into the sky. The cultivation base of the 2 old men was obviously much stronger than the rest of the people present. Moreover, the 2 of them had joined forces to attack. Even though the hurricane was unstoppable, it could not break through the strong defensive line formed by the 2 men. Although the wind had changed direction, it did not seem to stop. Instead, it swept up more grass, trees, sand and pebbles, covering the sun and sky in an instant. One could not even see one's fingers if one stretched out one's hand. Then, a ray of fire appeared, burning fiercely in the middle of the battle. Yang Buotao's subordinates were indeed elites. There was no hesitation in the face of such a drastic change. With a loud bang, a large pit was smashed into the ground. Everyone had acted in unison to extinguish the abrupt fire. The hurricane rose up like a raging dragon. One could vaguely see a human figure in the middle of the hurricane. A leisurely voice spoke. Yang Buotao, as an important general of the empire, you do not wish to serve the country but collude with the enemy to frame my 9 Supreme's brothers. Your crime is unpardonable. Today, I will only mete out a light punishment. If you dare to commit the offense again, you will be beheaded without mercy. The voice rose slowly, coming from afar. Everyone present could hear it clearly. The sound of the wind finally subsided. There was a large pit in the residence of Yang's field. The masked man in black who was severely injured just now was nowhere to be seen. The 2 elders beside Yang Buotao had disappeared without a trace as well. They had given chase, but it was unknown if they could still catch up to them. Yang Buotao's expression was solemn, his eyes filled with rage. At this moment, a portion of the archers on the surrounding walls were stunned. Bewildered gazes looked from all directions, focusing on Yang Buotao. Was the person who had spoken just now the long-awaited Lord Supreme Wind? Was what he had said just now true? Was it really Yang Buotao who had gone mad and colluded with the enemy to murder the 9 Supreme's lords? There was no factual basis for this matter, nor was there any witness or evidence. There was no room for it to be believed. However, it was Supreme Flame and Supreme Wind who had appeared just now. There was no falsehood in this. They were all people who had been through the battlefield and had the experience of fighting alongside the 9 Supreme's lords many times. There was no mistaking this familiar feeling. If these words had come from the mouths of these 2 lords, was there a need for proof? There was no need. The Empire of Yutong's military would never doubt the words of the 9 Supreme's lords, no matter what the content was. There was no room for doubt. Clang! An archer who had been standing on the wall retracted his deicide bow and hopped down from the ground. He took a few large strides and came before Yang Buotao, asking loudly, "Marshal Yang, may I ask if what Lord Supreme Wind said just now is true?" As the words left his mouth, the gazes of countless archers shot over like sharp arrows from all directions. Other than the 100 archers from Yang Buotao's troop, the rest of the archers were all staring at Yang Buotao with burning gazes. Even the archers from Yang Buotao's troop had lowered their heads and perked up their ears, waiting for Yang Buotao's reply. Yang Buotao's expression darkened as he hollered, "It was just the ramblings of the assassin who attacked just now, trying to mislead us. Why did all of you join in the commotion? Didn't you all see the assassin trying to kill me just now? Military orders must be obeyed. Do all of you want to give it a try?" The military's actions were based on absolute obedience to the superior's orders. Any action that questioned the superior's orders was a crime deserving of death. Under normal circumstances, when Yang Buotao had spoken, everyone dared not say anything, even if they still had doubts in their hearts. Unexpectedly, the archer who had stood up to ask the question said loudly, "This lowly official's confusion doesn't lie with me but with the 9 Supreme's lords. I hope that Marshal Yang can clear up our doubts. If there's anything that violates the military law, this lowly official will shoulder it all and apologize with my death later." But it was the 2 masters of wind and fire who showed up just now, and they were good at the fire and wind supernatural powers. Since the 2 masters appeared here and even pointed at the marshal, there must be a reason. This is related to Yutong's national affairs. This lowly official's life is not worth mentioning, but this matter must be clarified. Everyone knows that the marshal is the Empire's pillar, the protector of the border. Why would the 9 Supreme's lords come looking for trouble with the marshal in such a blatant manner? And even say that Sir is suspected of harming the 9 Supreme's lords? The archer said boldly, "Marshal, please clear up our doubts." Before his words echoed in the air, the 300 archers behind him spoke in unison, "Marshal, please clear up our doubts." Yang Buotao's expression was as dark as ink as he said in a low voice, "There's an assassin trying to kill me in broad daylight. You all." Before he finished, a man in green beside him said, "Marshal Yang, there are only 2 assassins here today. One is the assassin who attacked us earlier. His moves are brutal. The other person's cultivation method is strange, but his strength is not high. The move of throwing the fireball is probably from the Thunderbolt Hall. However, the other person's method of turning mystical chi into gang and moving like the wind is even more strange and inexplicable. We can't underestimate him." Nominally, this was an analysis of the assassin's background, but it was actually a roundabout way to provide a reason for Yang Buotao to deal with the doubts. Yang Buotao understood. He frowned and said, "2 people? Not 3 people?" The man came out in a flash and picked up something from the pit. He said, "Marshal Yang, please look at this kerosene that hasn't burned out yet. This kerosene is bright and faintly glows with a green luster. It's clearly the unique kerosene of the Thunderbolt Hall's Clear Sky Thunderfire. However, I don't know when Marshal offended the Thunderbolt Hall and caused this assassination." Yang Buotao frowned and sighed deeply. He said, "About a year ago, the young master of the Thunderbolt Hall entered my service. His original intention was to use his military merits for promotion, but I beheaded him for violating military law. Sigh. Although I have a clear conscience in handling this matter, the military law is still too strict. However, it was a war at that time and I really couldn't show mercy outside the law." "I see. In a war, military law comes first. Lawbreakers must be punished and law enforcement must be strict. This is how it should be." The man in green said, "However, the power of the Thunderbolt Hall is too great. Marshal, you should be careful from now on and not be taken advantage of." Yang Buotao shook his head and sighed. How can the military law be lenient? Even if I had to do it all over again, I would still enforce the law strictly. There's no room for discussion. So what if the Thunderbolt Hall comes looking for trouble with me? Yang Buotao said righteously, I'm just worried that the enemy is full of tricks and that our brothers will think too much. Another person hollered with a dark expression. Did everyone hear that? Don't just listen to rumors in the future. If you believe a few words spoken by an assassin, won't any random person be able to shake the military's morale with just a few words? What a scandal. The archers looked at each other, doubt still lingering in their eyes. Finally, they lowered their heads and said, We were too agitated just now and have misunderstood Marshal. Please punish us, Marshal. The archers lowered their heads and looked at each other, noticing the glint of doubt in each other's eyes. They had seen it with their own eyes and heard it with their own ears. How could it be erased with just a few words? Yun Yang's short sentence had planted a seed in the hearts of the northern troop soldiers. Was it true or not? Chapter 242. Yang Buotao sighed and said, All of you are hot-blooded, what crime have you committed? It's not just you. I've been hoping for the arrival of both Lord Supreme Wind and Flame just now. Even if both of them misunderstood me for some reason or even killed me. As long as both of them are still here, it's the Empire of Yutong's greatest blessing. The group sighed together. The incident in the residence of Yang had finally come to an end. The tornado that Yun Yang had turned into swept Feng Mafei along and disappeared instantly, the two silhouettes chasing after the tornado relentlessly. Yun Yang saw that the other party's abilities were profound, and that he could not shake them off with just his wind manifestation. Without hesitation, he waved his hand. The two men felt a ball of fire coming towards them and hurriedly countered it with their palms. With their cultivation base, a wave of their hands was enough to extinguish the oncoming fire. However, both of them felt that something was amiss at the same time. The two balls of fire were too weak, dispersing upon contact. There was no room for resistance at all. Just as the two men were in doubt, they saw another ball of fire that was even more intense and wider than before. It burned fiercely and engulfed both of them in an instant. Both of them were shocked. Seeing the intensity of the fire, they dared not be careless. They first circulated their profound cultivation base to protect themselves and then worked together to sweep away the blazing fire. However, the intensity of the fire this time was still beyond their expectations. The range of the fire was vast, but it could not withstand a single blow. It was just that the range of the fire this time was too wide. When the two men rushed out of the fire, they realized that the tornado had already disappeared. Both of them were veterans in battle. They knew what was going on from the slightest clue and stopped immediately, activating their deific consciousness to search. Supreme Wind seemed to have left with his men, but both of them had only been distracted by the fire for a moment. Supreme Wind and the injured assassin would not have gone far. They must still be hiding nearby. As long as they searched carefully, they would definitely be caught. How could Yun Yang not know that the two pursuers were not easy to deal with? The trick just now could only distract the enemy for a moment, but what he wanted was a moment of buffer. He brought Feng Mafei into an abandoned house and simply bandaged his wounds before saying, Stay here and don't move. Leave immediately when I lure them away. This is no problem for you. No need to say anything more. To an assassin, the ultimate assassination technique was secondary. Concealing one's tracks was the most powerful trump card. If Feng Mafei did not even have the means to conceal his tracks in the face of danger and not be discovered by his pursuers, then he was courting death and had nothing to do with anyone else. Before Feng Mafei could speak, Yun Yang had already turned into a gust of wind and disappeared into the horizon with a swoosh, trailing a black silhouette behind him. How could the pursuers let go of the man who was being carried away by the tornado? With a loud cry, they gave chase like a flash of lightning. To the both of them, it was not that they had not thought of the possibility that the person who had cast the wind manifestation skill had not escaped together with the injured. However, Feng Mafei was not even a threat to them. He was only an 8th peak cultivator, nothing to be afraid of. Instead, it was Supreme Wind who was in front of them that they had to eliminate. There was no time to lose. Seeing the shadow of death leaving swiftly, Feng Mafei was saddened. However, he did not slow down at all, moving swiftly and leaving his original spot. In the sky, a tornado swept forward like lightning, causing the clouds in the sky to scatter and scatter as it swept out of the city. By the time Yunyang returned to the residence of Yun, it was already late in the night. He was exhausted. His legs felt like they were floating. He was utterly exhausted. Feng Mafei and Lao Mei had already returned home. Even Feng Mafei's injuries had been tended to. Xue Wuyin was deep in thought, facing a pile of items, occasionally scribbling and drawing with his brush. How was it? Yunyang was truly exhausted. He sat down in front of Xue Wuyin the moment he returned home, but there was no sense of defeat in his expression. The attack this time was a complete success. Xue Wuyin looked satisfied, even elated, as he said, "Our current goal has basically been achieved." His words stunned Feng Mafei, who had been suppressing his injuries and refusing to go into closed-door recuperation right away, waiting for Yunyang's return. Our two-pronged attack this time. Lao Mei had killed Han Wufei effortlessly and had indeed completed the mission. However, he himself had stepped right into the ambush and was almost beaten into a dead dog. If it weren't for Yunyang's assistance, he would have become a dead dog. How could this coffin-faced man say that it was a complete success? Was this consolation or sarcasm? Could he be more straightforward? Yunyang nodded. Not bad indeed. The target has been achieved. Feng Mafei could no longer hold it in and said, "Young master, we didn't kill Yang Buotao. It's this subordinate's cultivation base that's not up to par. I've let young master down." Yunyang smiled. "Old Feng, you don't have to blame yourself. Our attack to kill Yang Buotao this time was only a pretense from the beginning to the end." A pretense? Feng Mafei was even more puzzled, not understanding what Yunyang was referring to. Of course it's a pretense. I've never thought that you could kill Yang Buotao alone. Yunyang said, Yang Buotao's background as a member of the Four Seasons Tower aside, his status in Yutong is equally respected. He's one of the 4 marshals of Yutong's military, and the entire northern troop respects him. For such a person, even if the evidence is conclusive, we can't assassinate him in secret like this. Speaking of which, Han Wufei was an unexpected gain today. Yunyang smiled. Lao Mei's visit this time was more of a test. If there was an ambush there, Lao Mei would have returned at once and wouldn't have taken the risk. However, I didn't expect them to focus all their ambush on Yang Buotao's side and even put in deicide archers. They probably thought that Yang Buotao would be safe with Supreme Lord Springfrost's protection. Lao Mei said, "That's not bad." Han Wufei's side didn't have any decent guards at all. The entire killing process was so smooth that even I was puzzled. The moment I broke the door, I was prepared to run for my life. But when I felt it, there wasn't a single expert on the other side. Only Han Wufei had some ability. When I had the upper hand, I was filled with disbelief and shock. Haha. Feng Mafei looked at Lao Mei begrudgingly. This fellow's luck was really good. Could it be that luck was better when one's ability was weaker? There were 3 objectives today. First, to alert the enemy, to get a glimpse of the other party's ability. Second, to reveal Supreme Wind's identity. Third, to send a signal to the Empire's higher-ups. Xue Wuyin said with satisfaction, "It looks like everything has been completed successfully and there's even an unexpected gain." Just like what Boss said, the additional deicide archers were an unnecessary addition. With the 500 archers by the side, the news of the 9 Supremes' reappearance can no longer be concealed. Next, Boss only needs to continue stirring up trouble. Yunyang snorted. Stirring up trouble? What I want to do most now is to go on a killing spree like a whirlwind. As he spoke, Whitey too walked over gracefully with a meow, its tiny head rubbing against Yunyang's calf. Whitey too did well in this battle. Lao Mei laughed and said, Han Wufei's head was bitten off by Whitey too. Whitey too raised its head proudly and meowed. Yunyang, who was carrying Whitey too, felt a chill run down his spine. He tossed the creature to the ground and said with a frown, "Whitey too, you actually ate a human head. That's disgusting." Whitey too meowed pitifully. Lao Mei said, "Whitey too didn't eat it, it threw it up again." However, 2 men went to Han Wufei's side and Whitey too laid in ambush. Each of them had a scratch mark on their calf. Yunyang's eyes shone. "Whitey too, if you see those 2 men again, can you recognize them?" Meow. Whitey too raised its head proudly and snorted. It looked proud and arrogant. I can recognize them even if they turn into ashes. That's great, that's great. Yunyang guffawed. The advisor of the Crown Prince's residence was murdered. The Northern Marshal, Yang Buotao, was assassinated. The two assassinations that had taken place in a single night had broken the peace of Tiantang City. When they heard that the Northern Marshal had been assassinated, the assassin had turned into a tornado and a raging inferno. This incident had shaken the entire Yutong's higher authorities. Everyone thought of supreme wind and flame at once. Especially when the assassin had left a message in the air. The message had been heard by everyone present. No matter how Yang Buotao explained to his troops, it could not hide the gossip. The news had spread throughout Yutong's capital city overnight. Yang Buotao, as an important general of the empire, did not think of serving the country but colluded with the enemy to frame my 9 Supreme's brothers. This is an unpardonable crime. The words were like thunder on a sunny day, shaking Yutong. Morning assembly. When His Majesty the Emperor arrived, his expression was extremely grim, not bothering to conceal it at all. The 9 Heavens dictum had informed Qiu Jianhan that the advisor of the Crown Prince's residence, Han Wufei, had been confirmed to be from the Four Seasons Tower and had been killed. This was supposed to be good news, but for His Majesty, there was suddenly an additional knot in his heart. The advisor of the Crown Prince's residence. The murder of Chu Tianlang earlier was related to the Crown Prince. This had already infuriated the Emperor. Now there was Han Wufei, the main advisor of the Crown Prince's residence. How could this not make His Majesty even more worried? The anger in his heart immediately soared. Furthermore, there was He Han Qing. Even if he was an elder of 3 dynasties and the leader of Yutong's literary school, so what? After all, he was somehow related to the Four Seasons Tower in every aspect. Ling Xiaozui's angry rebuke was the biggest proof. The empire of Yutong was plagued with internal and external threats. The emperor felt like a mountain was pressing down on his heart. Chapter 243. If it were not for His Majesty's health that had been nurtured by Yunyang during this period of time, he would have been fine. His anger alone would have suffocated him for a long time, but now that his body was getting better, as long as he did not engage in a life-and-death battle, he could usually expect to live to a ripe old age, much less be frustrated. After all, His Majesty's cultivation base was rather high as well. It had not even been half a day since His Majesty's mood had gotten better, but the possibility of Yang Buotao being a member of the Four Seasons Tower had come to light. This sudden realization made His Majesty feel like 100,000 horses were galloping in his heart. He was the pillar of the military, one of the 4 marshals. Is the Grand Commandant here yet? His Majesty sat on the throne with a grim expression. Qiu Jianhan coughed and said, "The Grand Commandant has been ill lately, but he'll be here today. It's just that the Grand Commandant's body is more sensitive to the cold during the season, so he might have to make some preparations before arriving." His Majesty nodded in understanding. "Please wait then. Has the Grand Tutor arrived?" "This humble official is here." "Have the marshals arrived?" "Your Majesty, this humble general is here." His Majesty snorted but did not speak, closing his eyes to rest. Not long after, a rough voice rang out, "This old official is ashamed to be late." His Majesty had just opened his eyes, but he closed them again. It was the Grand Commandant who had left, but it was Lung Daoyin, that old fellow. This old fellow was not ill, but he had come so late. Did he think this was his dining hall? Lang Daoyin was met with Qiu Jianhan's questioning gaze. Lang Daoyin rolled his eyes and sighed, pursing his lips. The corners of Qiu Jianhan's lips twitched. Glancing at Yang Buotao discreetly, Lang Daoyin strode into the hall. Among the officials in the imperial court, Tai Zhang was the tallest. As he stood in the hall, he was 2 heads taller than the next taller person. He stood out like a crane amongst a flock of chickens, looking down on the crowd. No one else spoke, only Tai Zhang's eyes were glaring at Yang Buotao without blinking, as if he was going to swallow Yang Buotao alive. Yang Buotao felt goosebumps rising from his glare and finally said angrily, "What are you looking at?" Tai Zhang grew angrier as he hollered, "So what if I'm looking at you?" Yang Buotao was also furious. "Why don't you try looking again?" Tai Zhang lifted his neck and looked askance at Yang Buotao. "I dare you to say that again?" Yang Buotao only felt a belly full of anger. Are you crazy? Without further ado, Tai Zheng threw a punch at Yang Buotao's face and cursed. F***CKU. Your father doesn't just want to look at you. I want to hit you and kill you. What can you do about it? Yang Buotao's cultivation base was definitely not low, but no matter how hard he racked his brains, he would never have thought that Tai Zheng would actually dare to attack him in the Aurum throne room. He took the full brunt of the punch, seeing stars before his eyes. Enraged, he leapt up and scolded, "You with the surname Tai." Before he could finish his sentence, Tai Zheng's second punch had already landed precisely on the other eye socket. At the same time, a flying kick landed squarely on Yang Buotao's lower abdomen. Yang Buotao's equally burly body fell onto the throne room with a loud thud, sending dust flying everywhere. The few civil officials behind him dodged hastily. Their eyes flickered quickly. It was rare to see an internal conflict between the military generals today. Such a spectacle was too rare. Tai Zheng was unwilling to let it go, pouncing forward to press Yang Buotao down and beat him up again. Yang Buotao knew that Tai Zheng's ferocious nature had flared up. If he only attacked verbally and did not retaliate, this matter would be difficult to resolve. Yang Buotao seized the opportunity and kicked Tai Zheng's lower abdomen. The kick caused Tai Zheng to grunt, but he grabbed Yang Buotao's right leg, twisting his body to break it. Yang Buotao roared and arched his body from the ground, wrapping his arms around Tai Zheng's neck. Both of them fell to the ground. In the next moment, the sounds of pow, 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 pow rang out continuously. Both of them were thick-skinned men. In an instant, the throne room was filled with dust. Qiu Jianjun and Lang Daoyin, the two old marshals, were exasperated, rushing forward to mediate the fight, but they had unintentionally restrained Yang Buotao's limbs. Tai Zheng's hands were freed and punched again and again. After a few hits, Yang Buotao's blood splattered everywhere. His Majesty the Emperor had only squinted his eyes when he heard the earth-shattering noises below him. When he opened his eyes, it had already turned into a martial arena. Droplets of blood splattered everywhere. It was a mess. Tai Zheng pinned Yang Buotao to the ground and rode on him, punching and punching like a street thug, cursing with each punch, F***CK your grandma. Bastard! I'll beat you to death. F***CKU. What is this? His Majesty the Emperor was silent for a moment before he felt the world spinning around him. When he snapped out of it, he bellowed, "Stop it!" Tai Zheng retracted his fist and retreated, spitting, "You bastard son of a B***T got off easy. Why didn't I beat you to death?" Yang Buotao broke free from his restraints and roared, springing up from the ground like a ferocious tiger, charging towards Tai Zheng in a frenzy. It was obvious that he had lost all sense of reason. Yang Buotao's military identity was no less inferior to Tai Zheng's. He had been utterly humiliated today, being held down and beaten up by Tai Zheng in front of all the civil and military officials of the imperial court. "Stop it!" His Majesty the Emperor was enraged. "Yang Buotao, didn't you hear me say stop? What kind of behavior is this?" Yang Buotao's mind finally returned to a sliver of clarity as he looked at Tai Zheng, his face covered in blood. His finger stretched out, trembling, and pointed at Tai Zheng. "Just you wait." Tai Zheng looked back at him with a similarly enraged expression. F***CK your grandpa. How dare you threaten me? Just you wait. If your father can't beat you to death today, I'll beat you to death tomorrow. Shut up, all of you. Are all of you trying to rebel? His Majesty the Emperor bellowed. The two marshals glared at each other before turning around and bowing. "This official is guilty, Your Majesty. Please be appeased." His Majesty the Emperor was panting with rage, almost fainting as he bellowed, "What a disgrace! What a disgrace!" Yang Buotao looked aggrieved. "Your Majesty, this official has been wronged. This Tai Zheng has beaten this official like a mad dog today. This official has not offended him." Tai Zheng sneered, his laughter filled with disdain. His Majesty the Emperor said angrily, "Tai Zheng, why did you resort to violence in the imperial court today?" Tai Zheng said loudly, "Doesn't this bastard know what he has done? King hell. How dare he say he's being wronged? He's being wronged. He's insane. He's ungrateful. He's despicable. He's heartless. He's a bastard. Bah. Yang Butao was enraged. Tai Zheng, speak clearly. Tai Zheng's muscular body took a step forward. You bastard! How dare you feign ignorance? Let me ask you, what happened last night? Yang Butao's heart sank, but he said, What do you mean last night? This marshal was assassinated last night and the assassin was being apprehended. Apprehended my asterisk. Tai Zheng's white teeth were almost about to bite Yang Butao's face. Supreme Wind and Supreme Flame went to your residence of Marshal and announced that you're the one who framed the 9 Supremes battle. What injustice do you have left to speak of? Yang Butao defended himself loudly. Nonsense! The assassins who attacked last night were obviously from Thunderclap Hall. They resented me for executing military law and killing their young lord. That's why they came to assassinate him. Tai Zheng, do you believe whatever the assassin says? Are you an idiot? Can't you use your brain a little? Supreme Flame's arcane art of fire is completely different from Thunderclap Hall's arson art. One is internal while the other is external. Their nature is different. Anyone with eyes can tell. Tai Zheng pursed his lips in disdain and said, Executing military law and killing Thunderclap Hall's young lord? What a selfless and strict Marshal Yang. Come, tell me, what's the name of the Thunderclap Hall's young lord who served in your army? What position did he hold? Why did he violate military law and was killed by you? Come, tell me everything. I'll investigate this Thunderclap Hall's young lord and see if he's really a person and guilty of a crime. Yang Butao said angrily, It's been so long, who would remember such a trivial matter? If it wasn't for last night's incident, it's just a passing cloud. Whose hands haven't been stained with the blood of executing military law? Tai Zheng said angrily, Do you think I've never led a troop? Don't King play dumb with me. The military law has always been specifically recorded. Did you King lead a bunch of mobs? Yang Butao, you deserve to die 1,000 times over. Yang Butao said, Tai Zheng, you're being so aggressive because you're jealous of my military merit, jealous that my position is higher than yours. I know you've been dissatisfied with me for a long time. As long as I'm around, your title as the unrivaled man of the younger generation in the military will be hard to live up to. Tai Zheng sneered. Unrivaled man of the younger generation in the military? Forget about the fact that I've never cared about this title. Even if I did, do you think you're fit to be mentioned in the same breath as me? Tell me, what other military merit have you achieved in these 2 years? Your father is in charge of the East and you're in charge of the North. Why would I be dissatisfied with you? You're not my King's son either. Your father is dissatisfied with you? Do you think you're worthy? You're a heartless thing. Even if you were to be my son, your father would despise you for sullying my name. Tai Zheng's rebuke was unstoppable. Although Yang Butao retaliated, his aura was much weaker. His Majesty wanted to stop him, but after some thought, he could only watch from the sidelines. Yang Butao suddenly turned to kneel. Your Majesty, please seek justice for this official. Tai Zheng's mouth is filled with filthy words and he has humiliated and slandered this official in front of the court. This official is innocent. Your Majesty, please seek justice. Tai Zheng roared and was about to charge forward to lash out again, but he was held back by Qiu Jianhan. Tai Zheng struggled with all his might. His eyes bloodshot and the panting in his chest could be heard clearly. This ungrateful thing. He was ambushed in the Battle of the Northern Border back then. If it wasn't for the 9 Supremes who saved his worthless life, the grass on Yang Butao's grave would be 3 King feet tall by now. He actually participated in the murder of the 9 Supremes lords. Your father and I are irreconcilable. Chapter 244. Old Marshal Qiu hollered, Tai Zheng, be careful with your words. Such a grave crime, such a grave one. Where is the proof for you to speak so casually? As he scolded, he hurriedly exchanged glances with Tai Zheng. Tai Zheng panted heavily, his veins bulging, but he finally calmed down. Gritting his teeth, he glared at Yang Butao, ready to bite him if he had the chance. Your Majesty, this old official has come late. A panting voice came from the entrance of the hall. An old man with white hair and beard was hunched, coughing as he was helped in. It was the Empire of Yutong's military Grand Commandant, Fang Qingtian. However, This pillar of Yutong for so many years was now so old that he needed someone to support him even when he walked. On his face that was filled with age spots, there were scars all over it. They were the eternal mementos left behind by the old general's battle formation, a testament to the glory of the old general's battle formation. The one who helped old Grand Commandant Feng Qingtian in was the old Grand Commandant's assistant, his prized disciple, Fu Baogua, who supervised the board of war and held great authority. "Bring a chair here," His Majesty ordered. Even when Feng Qingtian sat down, he was still panting, feeling uneasy. He said, "This old official is ashamed that I can't bow and was instead bestowed a seat by your Majesty. I am extremely ashamed." His Majesty was moved as he said, "Today's matter is of great importance. It's my fault for troubling old Grand Commandant to attend the meeting. My dear Minister, please don't blame yourself. May I ask your Majesty, why have you summoned this official here today?" Feng Qingtian asked. His Majesty heaved a heavy sigh. The officials knew that this was the real climax of the day. All of them held their breaths in anticipation of what would happen next. Only Tai Zheng was still glaring at Yang Butao like he was looking at an irreconcilable enemy. Yang Butao dared to meet his gaze at first, but he had turned his head away later on. "Sigh, too many things have happened recently, especially the ambush of the 9 Supremes. It can be said to be the death of the Empire of Yutong." His Majesty's first words were a heavy topic. Yang Butao's expression changed, a tinge of panic evident in his eyes. He clearly did not expect His Majesty the Emperor to bring this matter up so directly. He was greatly surprised. "Before this, so many things have happened. I thought that after the Great Purge, most of the spies were gone. But now it seems that I was too optimistic, and now there are even more problems." His Majesty looked at Yang Butao and said, "Last night, Yutong's northern troops Marshal Yang Butao was assassinated. The assassin said publicly that it was to avenge the 9 Supremes. This is no trivial matter." All the civil and military officials in the imperial court were silent, deathly silent. The old Grand Commandant's wrinkled face slowly raised his eyes, which had long been covered by wrinkles, and glanced at Yang Butao. This glance seemed calm and indifferent, but Yang Butao broke out in a cold sweat. Although he was old, his ambition was still there, and his prestige did not diminish as it was in the past. "Yang Butao, explain," old Grand Commandant Feng Qingtian said faintly as he slowly closed his eyes. His entire body was like a rotten piece of wood, without the slightest bit of vitality. In spite of this, those who were familiar with him knew that the old Grand Commandant was using his lifetime's ultimate skill, ingenious volition. This was the old Grand Commandant's unique skill. There was rarely a record of it failing. The mystical aspect of this arcane skill was that it could listen to the slightest emotional fluctuation in the speaker's heart. In other words, any lies or falsehoods would be exposed before the old Grand Commandant's ingenious volition. Yang Butao stood up, his head and face still stained with blood as he spoke in a hoarse voice filled with grief and indignation. "Last night, I was assassinated in my residence. The assassin did flaunt the name of the 9 Supremes Lords, but everyone present knew that it was only a ploy by a scoundrel. This official's first mission in the imperial court today was to ask your Majesty to uphold justice for this official, to remove this stain. Who would have thought?" Yang Butao said sadly, "I was beaten up by Marshal Tai Zheng indiscriminately the moment I came to the imperial court. A few of my colleagues pretended to stop the fight, but they were actually taking the opportunity to restrain me, allowing Tai Zheng to beat me up. When the old Grand Commandant arrived and His Majesty started the meeting, the first order of business was to ask me, Yang Butao, to defend myself. I was first assassinated, then beaten up, then isolated, and now I'm asked to defend myself. I, Yang Butao, have joined the army since I was young. I've been at the forefront of all battles. I've gone through over 700 battles, big and small, to achieve this position. Your Majesty's boundless grace, Yang Butao worries day and night, afraid that I can't repay your grace. In the northern battlefield, I, Yang Butao, fought day and night, my life and death were nothing to me. Although I didn't contribute to the country and couldn't expand our territory, I made sure that our land was not lost when facing the enemy's army. To this day, I'm covered in wounds, physically and mentally exhausted." Yang Butao choked, his eyes glistening with tears. "I have nothing to say about my past contributions. However, today His Majesty, the old Grand Commandant, my colleagues, The civil and military officials all think that I'm guilty, that the assassin's words are the truth. It's true that I, Yang Buotao, have murdered the 9 Supremes Lords. At this moment, in this situation, how can I, Yang Buotao, defend myself? There's really nothing I can say. However, I'm passionate and loyal. I've never felt guilty. I can't be slandered like this and not defend myself. I, Yang Buotao, have a clean reputation. I can't be humiliated like this. Since I can't be tolerated by the world, I can only die to prove my innocence. I hope that there'll be a day when the truth is clear. Yang Buotao's expression was fierce, his grief and indignation at its peak. With a sudden roar, he dashed to the door of the palace. With a clang, he snatched the sword of the guard on duty and swung it at his own neck without hesitation. Yang Buotao shall serve your majesty in my next life. With a shout, the sword was already at his neck. There was a sudden flash of a silhouette. Fu Baogua, who was beside the old Grand Commandant, flashed like a phantom and grabbed the blade of the sword, stopping it in its tracks. In spite of this, Yang Buotao's neck was already bleeding profusely. A deep bloody gash appeared on his neck. If it had been half an inch deeper, he would have lost his life, and there would have been no way to save him. It was not difficult to imagine the severity of Yang Buotao's act of suicide. Although Fu Baogua had stopped Yang Buotao's suicide by grabbing the blade of the sword, his right hand was already drenched in blood. He hollered angrily. Everything is unclear now. I only asked you to defend yourself and you're seeking death. Yang Buotao, you've disappointed me. His right hand continued to exert force, snatching the sword back and flinging it away with a swoosh. The sword was stabbed into the ground outside the palace door with a clang, still swaying. The blade of the sword was cold, blood dripping slowly from the blade. The crowd of officials looked at the long sword swaying endlessly at the entrance of the hall. Everyone was silent. Yang Buotao's face was filled with grief and indignation. Suddenly, he wailed, his tears gushing like a fountain. How can I, Yang Buotao, live in this world after enduring such humiliation? It's better to die and be clean. Fu Baogua heaved a long sigh and turned to kneel in the direction of the throne. Your Majesty, there may be something fishy about this matter. It needs to be handled carefully. Even if Yang Buotao is really guilty, he needs to be tried fairly to uphold the imperial law. To force him in front of the palace like this, it goes against the law. Your Majesty, please reconsider. As Yang Buotao bled profusely, Fu Baogua pleaded with tears of blood. His Majesty was moved as well, but he did not say a word. Old Grand Commandant Fong Qingtian was still sitting steadily, not even his eyelids twitching. Qiu Jianhan and Lang Daoyin stared at Yang Buotao with piercing gazes, their gazes icy, no different from before. Tai Zhang, on the other hand, snorted and mumbled, pretentious, disgusting. After a while, His Majesty frowned and said in a low voice, this matter is related to the ambush of the 9 Supremes. It's more serious than the crime of treason. Old Marshal Qiu and Lang, the Grand Tutor, and the Prime Minister are ordered to investigate this matter. The Grand Commandant will be in charge of the coordination. This case must be investigated thoroughly. Don't let it go unjustly. Don't let the souls of the dead rest in hatred. It's hard to distinguish right from wrong. The sudden change in the court meeting was extremely abrupt. The ministers did not even have time to react to the sudden internal strife in the military, and the civil officials did not say anything out of the ordinary. After all, to them, the military's infighting was a mess, killing each other. No matter who was defeated or defeated, the civil officials would be happy to see it. This matter has been decided. You may leave now, my ministers. The Grand Commandant and Marshal Qiu and Marshal Lung shall stay and talk to me. After the imperial court meeting, Tai Zhang snorted coldly and was the first to leave without hesitation. As he walked, he cursed under his breath. Disgusting. Trash. What a good act. F***CK, if you really want to die, why didn't you just sever your own heart meridians? Why didn't you just shatter your own skull? Why did you have to rush to the palace door to snatch the sword and then come back to commit suicide? What the hell? Do you really think everyone is blind? The other 2 burly generals caught up to Tai Zhang with large strides. Old Tai, it looks like you know about this matter. Tell us about it. I'm in a hurry. Tai Zhang said furiously. Are the both of you blind or deaf? Are you so stupid that you can't tell? Don't you understand? If you're really blind and deaf, would you be able to hear even if your father were to tell you? Your father doesn't have time for you two idiots. The two generals said angrily, Tai Zheng, we've never offended you. Why are you venting your anger at us? We only want to know the truth. If you're willing to tell us, then tell us. If you're not, then forget it. You keep calling yourself your father. What are you pretending for? Tai Zheng pretended not to hear them and continued to walk. His legs were long and the two generals behind him were indignant, catching up to him in a couple of strides and asking again. Only then did they hear Tai Zheng say angrily, "What else is there to say? The ambush of the 9 Supremes Lords is Yutong's heartache." With the 9 Supremes Lords' remarkable abilities, if it wasn't for the ambush and the betrayal of the traitor, how could all of them be in trouble? Now that Supreme Wind has appeared personally to testify against Yang Buotao, he even wants to interrogate him. His Majesty is obviously senile and can't tell right from wrong. He even said that black and white are clear and justice is in the hearts of the people. Chapter 245. Tai Zheng struggled to free himself and rebuked loudly. It's because there are too many cowards like you that the murderer can get away scot-free. Things are already so clear, yet you're still pretending to be ignorant. Humph. Follow me to the residence of Northern Marshal if you have the guts. The two generals turned and left without another word. They dared not continue talking to this idiot anymore. If they did, they might really be dragged to the residence of Northern Marshal to fight for their lives. However, both of them were still whispering along the way. What Marshal Tai said isn't unreasonable. Who said he's unreasonable? Even if he's reasonable, he can't say it so clearly. After all, Yang Buotao's identity is there. So what if his identity is high? I've long felt that something was wrong with Yang Buotao. Forget it. Would you really dare to say this if it were today? Let's not talk about this. Say, is the Supreme Wind who appeared yesterday real or fake? I hope it's real. I still hope it's real. But if it's true, then Yang Buotao is finished. It doesn't matter if Yang Buotao is done for. As long as Lord Supreme Wind is still alive, Yang Buotao is nothing. Yes, if Lord Supreme Wind is still alive, perhaps Lord Supreme Flame is too. There's also Supreme Earth, Supreme Water and the rest. They might still be alive. Let's hope so. Yang Buotao returned to the residence with heavy footsteps. He felt the road ahead was a blur, his eyes filled with gloom. Right now, he could already faintly feel that his doomsday had arrived and was just around the corner. It was already in consideration of his years of hard work that the imperial court did not detain him. In fact, before the morning assembly, this feeling had already been lingering in his heart. It was just that he had been lucky enough to stun hundreds of deicide bow archers last night that he had made a few backup plans, hoping to be lucky. However, the reality before him had proven that the 9 Supremes were too important to the Empire of Yutong. A single word from them was enough to override the countless merits he had accumulated. This was a hopeless truth and reality. Summon. Discuss. Tai Zheng returned to the residence and gave the same order. Summon. Assemble 50,000 troops immediately and set off to surround the residence of Northern Marshal once it's assembled. No one is allowed to enter or leave as long as it doesn't affect normal life. Pass down my order. Close the 4 gates of Tiantang City. Martial law will be enforced from today onwards. You can only enter, but not leave. Gather the experts in the army. All cultivators above 5th grade, stand by. Mobilize the deicide archers. Target the Northern Marshal's residence. Anyone who tries to enter will be killed. Even a bird from the outside world is not allowed to enter. Tai Zheng's orders were passed down one by one. Commander-in-Chief, this, without His Majesty's Imperial Edict, and without the Tiger Tally, this, mobilizing the troops without authorization is a serious crime. Tai Zheng's advisor was filled with worry. Ever since he had followed this Eastern Troops Marshal, he had been shocked 3 times a day. Tai Zheng's audacity had reached a level that made one's hair stand on end. He didn't know when his temper flared up, but in the blink of an eye, he threw caution to the wind and exploded without any rational judgment. I'll bear all the consequences. All of you just do your job. Why are you so long-winded? Taizheng said fiercely. Sure enough, it was this sentence again. The advisor lamented in his heart. If it wasn't for His Majesty the Emperor's magnanimity, like Taizheng, he would have been beheaded and his possessions confiscated no less than 60 times over, no matter how great his meritorious service was, as long as the Emperor was so narrow-minded. All right, I'll arrange the manpower immediately. I'd rather commit the crime of deceiving the Emperor than let the person who murdered the 9 Supreme Lords get away scot-free. Taizheng hollered. Send the order to the entire army. Place the 9 Supreme Lords' altars. Once the battle begins, the rolling heads will be the offering. At the same time, the Western troops' military officers who were stationed in the capital city moved at the same time. Seal the city gates. Pay close attention to the movement. Deicide archers. Get ready. Experts gather. Get ready to move. The Southern troop. Assemble. Assemble. From now on, wartime regulations. Everyone, even if they're going to the toilet, must report beforehand. Even if someone dies in the family, they are not allowed to go home. Lock down the entire military camp. Get ready to move. Deicide archers. Get ready. Mystical steel arrows, 10 arrows in one bow, confirmed to be in position. The military camps around Tiantang City were filled with a murderous aura. The soldiers were brimming with murderous intent. Their faces were cold and brimming with murderous intent. Portraits of the 9 Supremes were laid out and pasted on the walls respectfully. There were 2 big tables placed in front of the portraits. One of them was filled with fruits and offerings. The other table was only covered with a white cloth. There was nothing else on it. It was completely empty. It was prepared to be used to place the heads. Huge flags were suddenly erected in each military camp in an unusually ostentatious manner. Yutong's 9 Supremes. Heroes are immortal. Every soldier who passed by the flag saluted spontaneously, their footsteps sonorous. The emotions of the countless soldiers were clearly surging. As they wiped their weapons silently, they pricked up their ears and listened attentively, paying attention to the slightest movement. They were afraid that they would be the slightest bit slower when the order to move was given. Every single one of them was like a taut bowstring. Once the order was given, they could leave the bowstring and shoot towards the target immediately. There were even more soldiers whose eyes were moist. It was not sadness, but agitation. 9 Supreme Lords, we can finally do something for you. Once the news is confirmed, we must avenge the 9 Supreme Lords even if we have to be cut into pieces. They had been holding this in for more than a year. Once it was vented, how could it be insignificant? The northern capital city's military camp was the opposite of the other military camps. At this moment, the Northern Army's camp was filled with chaos and noise as far as the eyes could see. Countless generals and officers were anxiously trying to suppress the inexplicable unrest that had suddenly arisen in the military camp. It was a pity that their pacification, conciliation, and forceful suppression were all futile. It was not that the effect was minimal, but it was completely ineffective. There were veterans who came to the tent's entrance with cold faces. General, is it true that the Marshal has plotted to murder the 9 Supreme Lords? General, is what happened last night true? Can't you give us a straightforward answer? Is it true or not? The generals were anxious, but they knew that it was wrong to say it, so they could only try their best to pacify them. This matter is still under investigation. The joint action of the 3 military leaders has even alerted the old Grand Commandant. Just wait for the news. The military cannot be in chaos. All of you go back and wait. Do you think we can hide the news from you? Do what you need to do. We'll inform you if there's news. I heard that Supreme Wind has appeared in the Marshal's house, saying that the Marshal is the murderer. Is this true? Go back quickly. You, I'm talking to you. Go back quickly. Why are you so fierce? I'm asking if this is true. I'll ask even if you behead me. A veteran glared, his eyes bloodshot as he pressed a hand on the hilt of his saber. We've been brothers for so many years. Stop putting on airs in front of me. I want the truth. Is it true? Is it true or not? Insolence. What kind of attitude is this? Do you still know who you are? Are you going to pull out your saber and interrogate me? The general roared. I just want to hear the truth. Why can't I hear the truth? The veteran straightened his neck, his veins bulging. Is it true or not? If it is, forget about me pulling out my saber at you, so what if I cut you down? Do you think I wouldn't dare? Mother ****. Even if it's true, it's Marshal Yang's business alone. Do you think someone of my rank can handle such a huge matter? The general was already frustrated. Now, he was utterly exasperated. He blurted out without thinking. Does that mean it's true? The veteran's aura grew more dangerous. I didn't say that. You did say it. F***CKU. You F***King said it. You said it. The veteran's eyes were burning with a murderous intent. I didn't say it. I didn't say anything. Go back, all of you. Go back quickly. Why are you surrounding your father here? Do you have any military discipline? Seeing that he could not pacify them or suppress them, the general decided to throw a tantrum. Your father is also waiting for news here. What's the use of surrounding your father? If it's true, your father will fight Yang Buetao to the death even if I have to rebel. Now we still need to wait for more concrete news before everything can be set in stone. Can't all of you wait a little longer? Do you think you're the only ones who are anxious? Your father is going crazy from anxiety. Do you know that? The northern troop was seething like a pot of boiling water. All of us in the northern troop owe the 9 Supremes Lords at least one life. If this is true, how can all of us in the northern army have the face to face our brothers from the other forces? Can you embarrass us to death? We'll die of shame if we're ashamed. People say that a clear conscience is the way to act. We can never be calm from now on. We have a guilty conscience. Is it true? Is it true? F***CKU. Your father is just asking a question. Why don't you F***King answer it? In front of the barracks. The soldiers who were on duty had their heads lowered, standing there as if they were pleading guilty. They were the unluckiest. Others could still hide in their tents where outsiders could not see them, but these few who were on duty were exposed to the eyes of the public. While the inside was in chaos, the entrance of the barracks was eerily silent like a ghost town. There were already countless troops from the east, west, and south that had departed from the 3 camps, the vanguard of their weapons directed at the northern troops' camp. Occasionally, there were generals and soldiers from other designations who brought their men to the entrance of the northern troops' barracks to take a few rounds. Their gazes were filled with disdain and hatred. A bearded general brought his men to the entrance of the northern troops' barracks on horseback and snorted loudly. The soldiers who were on duty in front of the barracks lowered their heads even more in shame. I've been having a fever these few days. Sometimes I don't update in time. Please forgive me. Really, it's been 4 days and I've wanted to ask for leave almost every day. But I've resisted the urge. I'm not telling you to pretend to be pitiful or anything, but just don't be led by others and scold me along with the haters. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.